Kita melihat adanya tantangan secara finansial bahwa transisi energi membutuhkan biaya yang tidak sedikit. Kita membutuhkan dukungan pembiayaan tidak hanya dari pemerintah, namun juga dari berbagai pihak. Saat ini sudah ada beberapa panelis yang bergabung bersama saya secara virtual, dan dalam sesi ini saya akan mencoba untuk menggunakan bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Inggris untuk berdiskusi dengan para panelis kita. Dan bagi Bapak dan Ibu yang ingin mendengarkan dalam bahasa Indonesia ataupun bahasa Inggris, dapat memilih opsi interpreter audio di layar Anda. Pertama-tama saya ingin menyapa Bapak Edwin Syahruzad, Presiden Direktur PT Sarana Multi Infrastruktur atau PT SMI. Selamat pagi Pak Edwin.
Selamat pagi. Selamat pagi Bapak dan Ibu.
Now I would like to greet our international panelists as well. Here we have Sirpa Jarvenpa, Director of Southeast Asian Energy Transition Partnerships. Hello, Sirpa. Oh, sorry. Apparently Sirpa hasn't joined us. We also have Mr. Russell Marsh, Director of Infrastructure Advisory, Strategy and Transactions of Ernst & Young. Hello, Mr. Russell. How are you today? Oke, hari ini kita akan terlebih dahulu mendengarkan presentasi dari Pak Denny Gumilang, advisor dari GIZ Indonesia. Kepada Pak Denny, saya persilahkan.
Oke, thank you very much. Terima kasih atas kesempatannya. Respectful speakers and also ladies and gentlemen, colleagues in ISR, Pak Habib Tumiwa, the team as well. Please allow me to effective the time using bahasa Indonesia to present this PowerPoint. So, mohon izin, sebelumnya kami coba menyampaikan bahwa terkait pembiayaan dekarbonisasi memang ada beberapa hal yang kami coba lakukan di dalam program case seperti disampaikan sebelumnya. Salah satunya adalah bagaimana yang sudah ada itu bisa dikembangkan lebih detail lagi, dan kami melihatnya adalah salah satu instrumen itu adalah de-risking instrument untuk mendukung dekarbonisasi, pembiayaan dekarbonisasi dalam energi sistem di Indonesia. Jadi memang presentasi ini berupa analisis awal, dan memang kami baru berjalan 1 tahun dan berusaha men-trigger perubahan narasi di negara Indonesia, terutama untuk energi transisi sebagai program di Asia Tenggara. Bapak Ibu rekan-rekan dari ITP adalah merupakan mitra utama kami, dan kami juga bekerja sama dengan Bappenas di Indonesia, Kementerian PPN Bappenas di Indonesia. Untuk kali ini kami mencoba menyampaikan 5 bagian, dan bagian keempat mungkin karena sudah dibahas di hari kedua kami coba skip. Terkait dekarbonisasi sendiri memang kita melihatnya ada beberapa definisi sebagai flashback gitu ya, bagaimana pengurangan intensitas karbon rata-rata dari energi primer dari waktu ke waktu, bagaimana hal ini juga diterjemahkan London School of Economics sebagai emisi yang dihasilkan dari unit electricity yang dihasilkan. Lalu juga World Bank menyampaikan bagaimana dekarbonisasi itu terkait dengan zero net emission di CO2, jadi bukan berarti tidak ada emisi sama sekali. Dan lebih lanjut juga World Bank menyampaikan 3 prinsip yang menurut saya cukup baik adanya, bagaimana perencanaan bisa dikaitkan dengan tujuan akhir, bagaimana hal ini dapat policy dapat men-trigger perubahan di investasi, teknologi dan perilaku, dan juga bagaimana hal ini juga bisa mendukung proses kelangsungan transisi tanpa harus meninggalkan pihak-pihak yang terdampak. Lalu bagaimana dengan dekarbonisasi sendiri gitu. Hal ini memang menjadi salah satu isu global yang kami lihat, dan sebenarnya bagaimana kita mereduce emisi karbon tapi juga tidak melupakan atau tetap juga mengutamakan tujuan-tujuan sosioekonomik tercapai dengan baik. Dan kita coba melihatnya dari isu Paris Agreement dan juga energi transisi yang sudah dilakukan, karena memang di negara negara Indonesia termasuk bagian dari Asia Tenggara yang memiliki emisi yang sangat besar. Dan kita juga tidak melupakan tiga core sustainability dari energi, bagaimana ketahanan energi kita memperhatikan, bagaimana energi juga dapat memberikan jaminan kualitas kehidupan, dan juga bagaimana energi tidak merupakan aspek lingkungan. Ini menjadi bagian-bagian yang penting untuk diperhatikan dalam proses pembiayaan dekarbonisasi atau deep dekarbonisasi di Indonesia. Beberapa artikel ini cukup menarik yang kami analisis, dan mulai dari DPP, World Bank, lalu juga Science Based Target, beberapa lembaga, Postdem, Academia, World Economic Forum, dan termasuk ISR. Dari beberapa analisis tersebut kami melihat bahwa beberapa fokus bagaimana melibatkan private sector dalam mengatasi gap dalam dekarbonisasi. Sementara studi yang lainnya melihat bagaimana kelayakan dan juga implikasi biaya dari teknologi dan bagaimana meningkatkan efisiensi, dan berfokus di beberapa region atau negara yang dianggap perlu melakukan dekarbonisasi. Tapi sementara untuk Indonesia kami melihat bahwa ini adalah tren baru, dan sepertinya memang sangat menarik untuk melihat apa yang sudah dilakukan di hari kedua. Masih belum banyak memang fokus kepada policy instrumen yang dibutuhkan dalam memampukan hal tersebut, termasuk di sektor finance. Ya, seperti Bapak Ibu tahu, kita sudah melihat bahwa COP21 menjadi salah satu komitmen kita, terutama perubahan emisi seperti yang ditargetkan, dan bagaimana energi juga berkontribusi besar dalam hal tersebut. Ini juga di-update lagi melalui Leader Summit on Climate di bulan April. Bagaimana kita juga terbuka untuk investment untuk energi transisi, dan setelah itu Bapak Menteri Luhut menyampaikan bagaimana kita juga bisa mengupayakan adanya net zero emission dari tahun 2060 atau lebih cepat. Dan berdasarkan target yang ada, memang kita masih terus berupaya untuk meningkatkan target renewable energy, terutama dengan realisasi yang ada saat ini. Dan di sini beberapa earmark terkait policies yang terkait di negara kita. Namun yang menarik adalah bagaimana integrasi antara kebijakan-kebijakan ini, termasuk bagaimana LTS, LCCR yang sudah dikeluarkan oleh Kementerian Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan bisa juga bersinergi dengan apa yang dilakukan key stakeholder di sektor energi. Lalu juga net zero emission memang menyatakan adanya perlu untuk upaya signifikan dalam menurunkan emisi di sektor energi. Dalam konteks tantangan yang dihadapi di sektor electricity, kami mencoba menyampaikan presentasi yang disampaikan mitra utama kami di Direktorat KTI Kementerian PPN Bappenas, bagaimana dalam konteks primary energy ketergantungan pada fosil, lalu juga berkurangnya availability sumber energi, lalu juga kemampuan kita untuk memenuhi kebutuhan clean energy yang meningkat pesat masih menjadi suatu tantangan sendiri. Dalam proses transformasi, kami coba melihat bahwa sinergi atau integrasi antar perencanaan ataupun kebijakan yang ada seringkali masih perlu lebih sinkron, lebih selaras, apalagi dikaitkan dengan perencanaan di luar sektor energi seperti yang mungkin menyinggung isu energi seperti LCDI ataupun juga LTS dan semacamnya. Jadi memang kami juga melihat bagaimana PT PLN seharusnya mendapat proses transformasi yang lebih lagi, bagaimana dukungan bisa dilakukan juga sehingga proses investasi ataupun juga bagaimana teknologi bisa terbangun dengan baik, terutama menggunakan clean energy. Dan dari end user sendiri kami melihat bagaimana adanya kebijakan-kebijakan yang mungkin perlu dilihat lagi apakah memang ataupun bagaimana kebijakan itu bisa lebih efisien lagi untuk dijalankan. Di ini merupakan salah satu contoh bagaimana kami melihat bahwa proses clean energy ini melibatkan banyak pihak, gitu, terutama di sektor line ministries. Jadi dalam konteks pemangku kebijakan kami melihat bahwa dua kementerian koordinator berada di sini, lalu juga bagaimana menteri-menteri terkait, lalu juga Den di sini juga bisa mempengaruhi kebijakan-kebijakan yang ada. Dan hal ini tentu berimplikasi terhadap pembiayaan. Bagaimana fiscal support ataupun state budget allocation yang disiapkan oleh Kementerian Keuangan menjadi hal signifikan atau terintegrasi. Dan kami melihat Kementerian Keuangan sudah banyak juga curi start istilahnya untuk membantu atau untuk berintegrasi dalam konteks pengembangan clean energy atau dekarbonisasi ini. Lalu kami coba juga meng-highlight ya, beberapa memang sudah ada dan kami juga menantikan kira-kira net zero emission akan jadi seperti apa. Ini beberapa contoh yang ada yang kami coba rangkum gitu, termasuk modeling, dan kami melihat ada banyak donor terlibat di sini, bukan hanya GIZ. GIZ hampir terlibat juga dalam semuanya kami lihat, dan dalam beberapa proyek yang ada, dan kami melihat juga donor-donor lain, dan bagaimana donor-donor lain juga mengintegrasikan proses ini agar terinline. Mungkin itu menjadi harapan kami bersama. Kementerian Energi sudah menyampaikan ada beberapa hal yang terkait toward net zero emission dari sisi demand and supply. Bagaimana di demand terkait dengan residential, industri, dan transport sektor, sementara di supply diharapkan peak emission itu 2040, walaupun harapan jauhnya 2060 atau lebih cepat jika mendapat international support. Beberapa highlight adalah perlu adanya masif pengembangan clean energy, renewable energy, lalu juga penggunaan potensial CCS and CCUS teknologi juga untuk mencapai net zero emission. Lalu interconnection dan smart grid juga bagaimana dikembangkan lebih lagi untuk bisa mendukung net zero. Ini adalah beberapa bagian yang dikembangkan oleh Kementerian Energi. Lalu terkait finance sendiri memang cukup besar yang kami lihat. Estimasi sementara dari simulasi Kementerian Energi adalah mengungkapkan 1,13 triliun US dollar, dan kami melihat bahwa beberapa donor juga membantu proses kalkulasi ini, termasuk juga ISR sudah menyampaikan terlebih dahulu bagaimana secara teknologi dibutuhkan biaya yang juga cukup besar, terutama dalam konteks mempush net zero emission tercapai di 2050. Jadi dapat disaksikan bahwa di 2030, 2040, 2050 kita butuh pendanaan yang cukup tinggi untuk beberapa teknologi ini. Namun perlu dilihat juga bahwa ketika kita mengembangkan pembiayaan di sektor dalam konteks dekarbonisasi ini, memang ada enabling condition yang harus kita perhatikan. Jadi tidak bisa satu bagian saja. Jadi bagaimana makroekonomi diperhatikan. Di sini saya mencoba menyampaikan beberapa indikatornya: finansial, kondisi finansial, kondisi lingkungan, kondisi regulatory dan institution, kondisi sosial and behavior, lalu kondisi technical. Itu juga menjadi hal yang perlu dicermati dalam setiap aspek modeling yang dikembangkan ataupun perumusan dekarbonisasi di negara kita. Dalam diskusi yang kami lakukan secara internal, ada dua hal sebenarnya yang kami coba tarik dalam presentasi hari ini. Bagaimana carbon pricing atau carbon tax atau juga instrumen yang sedang dikembangkan bisa men-trigger proses pembiayaan dekarbonisasi. Yang kedua adalah bagaimana policy de-risking dan financial de-risking instrumen bisa mengakselerasi proses itu, gitu, proses dekarbonisasi itu. Namun sayangnya karbon sudah dibahas di hari kedua, jadi kita fokus ke bagian de-risking instrumen. Ada permintaan juga dari ESR, bagaimana linkage dengan sustainable finance dan juga kebijakan-kebijakan yang ada di Kementerian Keuangan ataupun di Bapak Edwin di sini PT SMI. Jadi memang kami melihat semua yang ada ini harusnya terintegrasi ya, bagaimana climate budgeting, climate change fiscal framework, KPBU, blended finance, SDG Indonesia One, termasuk juga environmental fund, itu bisa melakukan proses yang inline dengan perumusan kebijakan yang sedang kita lakukan gitu. Jadi ketika kita sayang sekali apabila hal ini dikesampingkan, karena hal ini sudah berjalan dan sebenarnya bisa sangat membantu proses dekarbonisasi kita. Lalu apa sih sebenarnya de-risking instrumen yang terkait dengan pembiayaan dekarbonisasi ini? Kami mencoba melihat hal yang sudah ada, tidak membuat sesuatu yang baru gitu. Kami melihat bahwa kajian UNDP sebelumnya terkait policy de-risking dan juga financial de-risking masih sangat relevan untuk negara kita. Bagaimana policy de-risking instrumen itu mengatasi penyebab atau akar masalah yang ada, dan juga bagaimana mitigasi risiko bisa dibantu oleh pemerintah, itu menjadi suatu hal yang sebenarnya penting untuk dilakukan. Financial de-risking sebenarnya bisa mengikuti, walaupun dalam prakteknya banyak inisiatif yang sudah berjalan. Kami melihat PT SMI sudah sangat cukup berupaya luar biasa untuk mendukung atau mengkatalis proses ini atau proses market terbentuk gitu. Dan bagaimana financial de-risking terus berkembang itu juga menjadi bagian yang ingin kami coba sampaikan. Secara singkat memang ada 5 hal. Yang pertama untuk policy de-risking adalah bagaimana kita meningkatkan kejelasan, clarity dari clean energy target dan policy coherence ini. Jadi hal ini kadang apabila tidak diperhatikan menimbulkan risiko sebenarnya Bapak Ibu. Jadi seringkali kita melihat ada perbedaan target misalnya, atau bagaimana hal ini bisa disesuaikan, apalagi perkembangan terus dibaharui, bagaimana link dengan NDC, LTS juga itu mungkin ketika konsistensi sudah ada, ini akan juga memudahkan proses engagement stakeholder dalam mencapai hal tersebut. Jadi memang ketika kita sudah sepakat bahwa dekarbonisasi targetnya sekian, proses financing juga harus mencoba menjelaskan hal itu secara clear supaya hal ini bisa tidak menjadi risiko dalam proses pembiayaan. Lalu saat ini memang terkait pricing dan kebijakan subsidi juga masih sangat dirasa mendukung pada fosil, ya, terutama batu bara misalnya. Lalu juga adanya anggapan bahwa masih belum atraktif kebijakan pricing kita ataupun adanya perubahan yang terjadi. Jadi memang kami terlibat dalam diskusi sering terlibat dalam diskusi terutama dengan Kementerian Keuangan dalam hal ini juga bagaimana kita bisa mendukung PT PLN sebenarnya untuk bisa dalam kondisi yang ada, dalam kesulitan misalnya yang mungkin dihadapi PT PLN saat ini dengan kontrak-kontrak yang ada dengan batu bara, bagaimana proses-proses insentif ataupun financing instrumen yang dikembangkan itu bisa bersama-sama didukung gitu. Dan ini yang menjadi bagian bagaimana misalnya PT SMI yang sudah punya MOU dengan PT PLN itu juga menarik untuk dilihat bagaimana pembelajaran yang sudah ada atau model-model yang baik yang sudah ada bisa diarahkan untuk mengubah dari transaksi yang lebih ke arah fossil fuel ke arah ke clean energy. Dan bagaimana juga shifting subsidies dari coal misalnya untuk clean energy itu juga menjadi bagian dalam diskusi yang semoga beberapa waktu ke depan bisa lebih terimplementasi dengan baik. Lalu kami melihat juga bagaimana perizinan dan procurement proses masih menjadi risiko yang cukup menghambat, sehingga hal ini mungkin perlu adanya ya, kami melihat ada beberapa donor yang sudah melakukan bantuan ataupun kebijakan yang mencoba mengarah hal ini gitu. Dan memang bagaimana hal ini tetap konsisten dilakukan sehingga menghasilkan kebijakan yang ajak mungkin perlu kita lakukan bersama-sama, karena seringkali izin ataupun procurement sendiri itu menjadi menghambat. Impact-nya mungkin malah proyek-proyek yang skala kecil seringkali tidak punya bargaining power, posisi tawar yang baik kepada PT PLN misalnya, ataupun kepada proses bankability di perbankan. Lalu bagaimana standar dan juga mungkin rating ataupun technical support terus dijalankan secara terintegrasi. Jadi memang hal ini kami melihat misalnya dalam beberapa PPA ada beberapa standar yang bisa saja berbeda gitu, dan ini menyulitkan untuk masuk ke sektor perbankan. Bagaimana hal ini terstandarisasi dengan baik ataupun technical support yang terus dikembangkan atau yang dilakukan untuk lebih dinyatakan dalam dokumen yang nyata, yang real istilahnya, itu mungkin yang lebih penting dan terbuka untuk sektor perbankan ataupun sektor investor atau developer. Lalu masalah utama bagaimana project visibility dan credibility seringkali dianggap kurang baik gitu, dan ini bisa saja dengan menyediakan fasilitas riset atau development yang oleh pemerintah dan capacity building yang membantu mereka menyiapkan proyek-proyek yang baik atau bankable. Mungkin skema KPBU dalam beberapa aspek, misalnya project development facility bisa mendukung juga sebenarnya bila mandatnya digeser misalnya untuk bisa mendukung proyek-proyek. Terutama dalam konteks kami ini memang proyek skala kecil dan menengah sangat kasihan untuk bisa masuk ke proses bankability yang baik. Lalu untuk financial de-risking instrument, kami melihatnya ada 9 bagian memang, dan beberapa sudah ada dan beberapa belum. Mohon maaf apabila informasi kami tidak terupdate, tapi kami melihat beberapa ini sebagai berikut. Yang pertama adalah penyediaan jaminan garansi. Ya, hal ini sebenarnya sangat membantu untuk menurunkan risiko, dan kami melihatnya ini masih limited. Mohon izin Pak Edwin, sepertinya ada juga arah dari PT SMI, KFW ataupun beberapa donor lain di dalam konteks ini. Semoga hal itu juga bisa membantu, ataupun ada juga proses-proses update di dalam konteks KPBU yang kami tidak tahu, tapi sebenarnya proses garanti provision ini cukup membantu dalam mengurangi risiko di sektor clean energy. Lalu performance based lending memang sudah ada, salah satunya disampaikan oleh inisiasi oleh IDB. Jadi memang PBL ini bagaimana meningkatkan project developer accountability ataupun insentif bisa terbangun.
Pak Denny, maaf 2 menit lagi Pak.
Siap. Lalu ada juga aset sekuritisasi, ini juga belum ada, tapi menarik melihat contoh misalnya sarana multigria finansial yang dekat dengan PT SMI bisa menjalankan itu dalam konteks perumahan, dan bagaimana itu bisa ke arah sektor energi akan sangat menarik. Green bonds, green sukuk sudah berjalan dengan baik, dan bagaimana hal ini terus dikembangkan. Sustainability bond juga sudah ada untuk mendukung clean energy, itu akan membantu proses dekarbonisasi di negara kita. Seed capital mungkin kami belum tahu banyak, tapi ada beberapa diskusi yang kami lihat juga bahwa startup ataupun initial product development itu dibangun melalui skema ini, dan semoga ada contoh-contoh real yang bisa membantu untuk menderisking kondisi yang ada. Lalu yang selanjutnya adalah convertible grant, yang bagaimana grant ini dapat di-convert menjadi into a loan dalam satu proses project yang dikembangkan, dan kami melihat PT SMI sebenarnya sudah mengembangkan ini dalam konteks blended finance. Lalu agregi. Selanjutnya adalah asset aggregation. Di sini sepertinya belum ada, tapi kami akan mengkoreksi juga bila memang sudah ada. Hal ini bukan hanya terkait agregasi di finansial, tapi juga di kebutuhan, di project, dan juga informasi. Lalu financing mezzanine, ini juga sepertinya belum kami lihat, tapi menarik apabila memang model-model ini bisa membantu proses financial project dari clean energy. Mohon izin sedikit lagi, 2 slide lagi. Jadi memang yang slide selanjutnya adalah terkait concessional debt. Memang hal ini sudah ada dikembangkan, dan semoga hal ini bisa berimpact lebih besar. Dan sebagai slide terakhir, memang kami melihat Indonesia masih di stage awal dalam proses dekarbonisasi. Dua instrumen yang mungkin bisa membantu, karena sudah ada sebenarnya sebagian besar, ataupun perlu dikembangkan lebih dalam, adalah terkait policy de-risking dan financial de-risking. Juga bagaimana optimisasi dari instrumen yang ada seperti climate budget tagging, climate change fiscal framework. Saya asumsikan Ibu atau public private partnership, KPBU, blended finance, SDG Indonesia One, ataupun the role of PT SMI BPDLH sebagai katalis. Ini juga menarik ketika hal ini bisa terintegrasi bersama, karena pengalaman kami dengan Kemenkeu sangat terbuka, dan bagaimana ini bisa dimanfaatkan untuk terintegrasi sangat menarik untuk mendukung proses dekarbonisasi kita. Terima kasih mungkin dari kami.
Terima kasih Pak Denny atas presentasinya yang sangat komprehensif tadi. Langsung saja kita akan mendengarkan tanggapan dari para panelis kita. Mungkin saya akan memulai dari Pak Edwin Syahruzad. Pak Edwin, ya, bagaimana Pak tanggapan Bapak untuk presentasi barusan?
Terima kasih ya. Kami pada dasarnya sependapat ya, bahwa dukungan kebijakan itu sangat dibutuhkan ya di dalam upaya untuk mendorong iklim investasi ya terhadap energi terbarukan apa namanya, dan dukungan kebijakan itu adalah bagian dari de-risking ya, untuk mendukung deep decarbonization finance kepada energy system di Indonesia. Nah, hanya saja ya, di dalam tahapannya dukungan kebijakan itu biasanya diberikan pada tahap project belum di-award kepada badan usaha. Ya, baik kebijakan fiskal, kebijakan budget tagging, maupun juga kebijakan sektor, ya, itu sangat dibutuhkan untuk meningkatkan bankability dari project itu sendiri, ya, renewable project itu sendiri. Ya, itu yang pertama. Dan berbagai insentif fiskal, sektor itu sebetulnya dapat diberikan. Mungkin kita bisa merujuk kepada hal-hal yang pernah diterapkan di negara maju. Setelah proyek itu di-award, ya, nah, disitulah baru kami sebagai lembaga pembiayaan mempunyai atau dapat memiliki peranan. Ya. Nah, di dalam konteks peran kami, ya, biasanya kami juga menyediakan fasilitas de-risking, ya, project de-risking itu dalam bentuk pemberian technical assistance dan capacity building yang pada gilirannya memudahkan developer itu mengakses baik kepada teknologi maupun juga kepada financing. Karena dua hal itu akan sangat penting ya bagi keberhasilan financing suatu project renewable energy. Nah, lanjut, ketika sudah masuk kepada financing stage, baru kita bicara mengenai financial de-risking. Kami sebagai lembaga pembiayaan yang kedepannya akan berorientasi lebih kepada pembangunan, tentunya akan mengintrodusir atau memperkenalkan produk-produk pembiayaan yang sifatnya lebih jangka panjang, ya, dan harapannya juga menarik bagi investor maupun developer, dan juga bisa complementary terhadap lembaga keuangan yang ada. Berbagai ya produk financial de-risking itu dapat diberikan misalnya dalam bentuk pinjaman yang panjangnya itu lebih dari 15 tahun. Karena segmen yang tersedia saat ini bagi perbankan mungkin hanya 15 tahun. Itu dapat menjadi salah satu avenue. Ya. Avenue lain bisa dalam bentuk pinjaman subordinasi atau mezzanine. Ya. Atau juga bentuk-bentuk first loss mechanism. Khusus mengenai first loss mechanism ini, kami bekerja sama dengan Bank Dunia mencoba menciptakan suatu skema pembiayaan khusus buat mendorong atau men-unlock geothermal exploration investment. Nah, itu misalnya. Juga bentuk-bentuk lain ya seperti concessional debt maupun juga kami terus memperkuat funding kami ya, borrowing kami dengan menerbitkan green bonds. Jadi berbagai macam avenue di tingkat financing, terutama kami sudah banyak melakukan inisiatif. Namun memang lagi-lagi kita perlu secara bersama-sama bersama dengan mitra, baik donor, partners, maupun juga developer, investors, untuk ya berupaya berkolaborasi agar semua pihak itu mendapatkan atau dapat memberikan sharing burden dan sharing risk allocation secara proper, ya utamanya agar investasi di area renewable energy dapat lebih cepat lagi, terakselerasi lagi. Tentunya tentunya juga dengan proper risk allocation dan proper risk sharing ya antara para pihak ya, baik itu pemerintah yang tentunya menyiapkan funding dan kebijakan, dan juga investor yang memang menyiapkan equity, serta stakeholder lain seperti PLN dan Pertamina, tentunya dua stakeholder yang paling dominan di dalam mendorong hal tersebut ya. Saya rasa itu mungkin yang dapat kami sampaikan. Kami setuju dan kami mendukung kajian yang telah dilakukan oleh GIZ, dan kita siap bekerja sama untuk merealisasikan atau mengimplementasikan hal tersebut. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Edwin atas tanggapannya. Jadi memang diperlukan integrasi dan kolaborasi dari berbagai pihak ya Pak untuk bisa sharing burden dari risk allocation project energi terbarukan. Next we would like to hear from Serpa. Please Serpa, tell us your comments. Serpa? Can you hear us? Hello?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning.
Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Sure, go ahead. Yeah. I'll repeat my question. Well, after we listen.
Thank you.
Yes.
I've heard your question. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay, wonderful. So good morning to everyone.
Morning, Serpa.
Yes, welcome to the session and congratulations for the 4th session of the Indonesia Energy Transition Dialogue. So it's wonderful to see the process continue. And also to your question directly, I would like to say that of course we agree. Adeni made a very good case about needing to bring the policies together. And I will take this further to complement what he just has said about the funding, that how much funding actually is available. So let me just say first few words about the Energy Transition Partnership that I represent here today. So the Southeast Asian Energy Transition Partnership represents a number of governments, United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Canada, and number of philanthropies, Children's Investment Fund Foundation, IKEA Foundation, Sequoia Climate Fund, and many others. So this Energy Transition Partnership brings together many partners that are already in the room who now want to work together on the energy transition acceleration in Indonesia. Energy Transition Partnership was established during a number of high-level meetings. It was initially the French President Macron's idea to bring the governments together with the philanthropies to address these very persisting problem areas such as the energy transition and greenhouse gas reduction needs. We work in Indonesia, but we also work in the Philippines and Vietnam in the region, and we have a very short timeline, 5 years, which corresponds to the urgency that we all feel need to be implemented in terms of energy transition. Our ultimate objectives in the room here are really to enable Indonesia to achieve its sustainable development goals, as well as to make a contribution to the Paris climate goals of retaining the global warming at the 1.5 or 2 degrees of Celsius. So now to your question, indeed, there are many estimates of how much this will cost. And in the UNFCCC nationally determined contributions, Indonesia has committed to reducing greenhouse gases by 41% if supported by international assistance. This is now counted to cost some $236 billion by the year 2030. And IESR itself with the Lappeenranta University has estimated this to be 20 to 30 billion per annum. And there are many other estimates, numbers, very high, really daunting numbers of finance needed. I saw another IESR estimate about the net zero energy target of the government at $60 billion a year for investments. So it's really, really very tall order to come together and make this financing possible. But what are we funding, first of all? And Padeni made a very good case about some of the areas, so I will just reiterate what we are looking at in energy transition and where the challenges lie. So first of all, yes, indeed, there are many programs around the government agencies. Donor development partners have many platforms, roadmaps, agendas. All of this policy agenda should be brought together under one energy transition roadmap, coordinated, staged, so that we can really implement a shared vision. And we can step by step work towards the goals under structured framework. Also, we have a big challenge in Indonesia, as the country is the second world's largest coal exporter. So the country has an economy that is reliant on coal energy and coal mining. So the government has been reviewing opportunities to decommission some of its coal-fired energy production capacity. And this can be done through various means. The ADB's energy transition mechanism was mentioned, alternative fuels, repurposing, and other methodologies can also be implemented. I also want to point out the opportunity to level the playing field here through review of the subsidy scheme. In addition, we have a barrier imposed on integrating renewable energy that is coming from the transmission and distribution network. So the grid technology currently is not able to securely integrate large amounts of variable renewable energy. And there we need to implement and integrate digital technologies to enable the grid to accommodate all of this variable renewable energy. Furthermore, we have a lot to do on energy intensity. The energy is being used now in a way that has many opportunities to improve efficiency in the building sector, in the transport sector, industry, of course, the public sector, and even the household use of energy and electricity. Offers opportunities to improve efficiency and thereby reduce our carbon footprint, reduce the energy intensity of the economy. Underlying all these areas is knowledge, skills, and awareness. Knowledge gaps exist among all of us and also among the policymakers, government officials, private sector parties, the think tanks and developers, and the civil society. The more we have awareness on the benefits of the energy transition, the more demand we have around that. And finally, all of our intention here is to find ways to unlock the investment. We know that the funding is available around the world. We need to be able to unlock that, unleash that investment and those resources for the Indonesian energy transition. I want to offer an opportunity to discuss clustering of the decarbonization tasks. There is so much to do. I suggest that we would look at first an outcome one, enabling policies, ensuring that all the government policies are in alignment with the climate commitments. Secondly, we want to work on the de-risking measures. Padeni and also Pa Edwin mentioned that it's critical to improve the bankability of the projects. Thirdly, as I mentioned earlier, we need to digitalize the grids. We need to extend the smart grid so that the variable renewable energy can reach everyone. Finally, we have lots of knowledge gaps and capacity building to support with new types of knowledge and learning platforms. And indeed, around the government, there are many plans. We need to bring these targets together, and this was a point that Padeni mentioned. We need to bring the government parties together and decide on one set of targets so we all work concertedly towards that. And we have lots of stakeholders around the table. We have many government agencies involved. We have a number of very ready development partners that are just waiting to unleash their programs. And we have also the civil society, private sector partners that are looking at us to ensure that we are strong with the policies and funding opportunities. But what's missing? We really have this huge community of funding available. And my own proposition is that as long as the political will in the nation is available, we can work together in a concerted fashion to unleash these fundings. So I can see that my time is ticking away, so I have to rush up a little bit. So let me just say that aligning policies is hard work too. And I want to point out the benefits of the stakeholder coordination, bringing everyone together, and especially starting with the big ticket items that like bringing the 2021 energy subsidy reforms back now that we are surmounting the COVID-19 pandemic recession. We are overcoming this problem. We can start to work on these very important reform processes. We have a lot of funders and partners around the table. We at ETP propose that we should build a united front for energy transition measures. We should establish a consultative group, communications group between the government parties and between the development partners so that we can dialogue on the outputs and outcomes that we want to achieve under one roadmap. And we want to bring the government parties and the development partners together under a results focus. That means a program that carries accountability for all of us to deliver on those agreed outputs. In terms of increasing investments and decreasing the barriers to energy projects.
Sirpa, you have 2 more
I'm just
minutes, sorry.
trying to show a deck of cards that offers you so many funders that are ready to provide resources for this tall order. In extending smart grids, we again have a big number of funders that are willing and interested in supporting the grid network. It's control centers, battery energy storage, ancillary services, all of which is so crucial in dismounting this barrier. In terms of capacity building and knowledge, these various areas of knowledge has also many interested partners around the table. And I want to point particularly about ensuring that we engage with all affected stakeholders under the principles of just transition, ensuring that all the stakeholders that are standing to be affected do have the knowledge and awareness to participate in the conversation and in design of the support programs that we all will want to finance and implement. Also, ETP wants to be part of it. And in this slide, I show how we are offering support. And the seed capital, for instance, just to pick one, was mentioned. Right now, we have an open call for energy efficiency innovation window, which provides exactly that, seed capital for promising bankable opportunities that need just a little bit more grant resources to take them to the commercial financing and make them projects that can offer energy efficiency outputs at scale. We have many other suggestions and are currently discussing how can we bring together the energy transition roadmap and bring the stakeholders around one table. We also work on these transitional programs on trying to provide diagnostics so that we can have more confidence around the transitioning away from coal agenda. And you see the others here. I want to thank you and just to say that I'm in the room with Pa An Dharmawan, who's our senior country program manager. And we look very much forward to working with all of you and ensuring that the stakeholders will come together around one roadmap that we can all support. Thank you, everyone, and good morning.
Okay, Sirpa, thank you so much for your great explanation. If I may conclude a little bit, we need government policies alignment with the climate target, and also we need to de-risking financing and extend small grid capacity to enable variable energy to come in. And also important is the capacity building for governments, private sectors, think tanks, and other stakeholders to realize the deep decarbonization of the energy system. All right. Finally, Russell, please give us your comments. You have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here from Singapore. A shame we can't all be in the room together for this event, but that's obviously the current situation, not just in this region, but globally. So I'll perhaps give a brief introduction to myself and the work that we're doing on green finance, in particular in Indonesia, and then I'll give my responses to the previous speakers. So EY is leading, and has been for the last 2 years, leading a program supported by the UK government, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, across the region on helping to mobilise green finance, and in particular working in Indonesia under what they call the Mentari program. And say it's all about helping countries mobilise finance to support low carbon energy activities in particular. And a couple of examples of the work we've done in Indonesia is we're currently working on some recommendations around how you align the Indonesian financial sector to achieve net zero, and have been working with some regional governments on guidance and capacity building as to how they can use the sustainable finance instruments to finance regional infrastructure. But I think kind of turning to sort of the comments in the presentation we've had already, and it'd be unsurprising for me to say I don't disagree with anything that anybody has said, but perhaps I can add a couple of my views on particularly say around the financing side. I mean, in a couple of things, and I think we've heard a number of people talk about the numbers and the amount of money that might be needed to invest it and finance the transition. And obviously that it's important to have some understanding of where we're going. But I will almost be able to guarantee that the numbers we're talking about today are wrong. They're either too high or they're too low. Between now and the target we're talking about, so many things that have happened in the market in terms of technology development, new technologies coming onto the market, technology costs going down, that say the cost of actual delivering the target we're talking about will be different to the numbers we're talking about today. You need to say look across other countries of the world who've had targets in place and look at the predictions they made or the forecast they made for the cost of doing that and the actual cost when they got to the target. You'll find that they're quite different. It's obviously important to understand and kind of what are we talking about? What's the magnitude of what we're talking about? But obviously we say we can get too hung up on actually trying to identify the specific number, say, because the final number will be quite different. The other thing, obviously, I think, and again, and I think Serp and others touched on this. I mean, in itself, money isn't the problem. I mean, there is plenty of money. There are plenty of organisations, whether they are, the Indonesian government, whether they are donors, whether it's private sector, whether it's multilateral banks. There is plenty of money globally to finance the energy transition. So the problem isn't the money. It's actually about how you direct that money to the activities that you want to support. And I guess that's where the presentations we've had, the last couple of presentations, I've started to talk about what are some of those barriers in terms of how do you develop the policies and the strategies to enable that money to flow to the different technologies. And so we've talked about in Indonesia some of the challenges in terms of sort of investing in renewable energy. And what's important, I think the thing we all have said, and I think everyone will support, is what's really important is having that certainty of a long-term target. So above all else, having clarity, having certainty and confidence that the long-term target the government has set is achievable, is deliverable, and again, stands a chance of being met and has the commitment of the government behind it. You'll have heard, know there's a number of countries globally that have kind of committed to net zero, and I mean the UK has a net zero target as a legal obligation. It's in government legislation, so the government is legally obliged to meet that target, and that obviously has a very big impact on how the government thinks about any kind of policy that it puts in place in terms of effectively all the policies the government puts in place have to be consistent with a net zero policy. And so thinking about, again, thinking about from the finance side, and how do you start to attract finance to Indonesia to help support energy transition and move to low carbon more broadly, having that clear clarity of target and real confidence that, again, that target is going to be met and the government can do everything it can to put in place the policies and measures that can meet that target. I mean, in effect, in the UK, under the net zero target, any kind of infrastructure that is built has to consider its impacts on net zero. I think the other thing I want to say, it's probably the last thing I want to say, that kind of goes a bit to both to what Serpa and Denny said. It's about coordination, and we need to be aware. And I was really interested in the polling at the start about whose responsibility is it to finance this, and actually the answer should be everybody's. It's not responsibility of one particular part of the economy. It's not one part of government. It's not the energy department's responsibility in Indonesia to finance, to drive the energy transition. It has a role. It obviously has a key role in terms of policies around renewable energy, but cross government needs to have everyone in government needs to be involved. I think you look at Serpa's slides, you indicated all the different bits of government that that they're working with and have a role. And it's clear that you need to not only think about just the energy department and the energy policies that are there to drive renewable energy, energy efficiency and other low carbon technologies, but also then think about the other parts of that, in particular on the finance side. What's the role of the Bank of Indonesia? So if part of this is about driving finance towards low carbon energy, what's the role in Bank of Indonesia making sure that the financial system and that the rules and regulations that Bank of Indonesia put in place are aligned and pushing the finance sector in Indonesia to seek out those lower carbon options? And again, once they start seeking out those lower carbon options, they then start asking questions of the developers, and they can start finding projects they can invest in. And similarly, with OJK, and making sure again, that you've got those parts of the government aligned to the net zero transition. You may be aware, I mean, in the UK now, the Bank of England, as part of its monetary policy, so as part of its setting of monetary policy, it now has to align that with net zero. So how does its monetary policy role support net zero? So thinking about how you align the other parts of the government, Indonesian government, so not just say, have you got the right energy transition policies in place, but have you got all the bits of government, whether that's Ministry of Finance and some of those other agencies, particularly where we're focusing from an EY perspective under the program we're running. So does the Bank of Indonesia have its policies aligned to support the energy transition? Is OJK's policies aligned to support the energy transition? So you've got the whole economy, both what we call the demand side, so the work on terms of have you got projects coming through, is there a clear pipeline of renewable energy policies? You've got the demand side. But at the supply side, on the finance side, is the finance system also aligned to be seeking out those low carbon energy projects? And if you bring those two together, then you have this shared vision, this shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve, and say each bit of the government putting in place the relevant policies and measures that it needs to do to support the energy transition, and saying in particular the financing of the energy transition. And I think there is more that Indonesia can do to bring together those different bits of government to work collectively on both the direction of travel for energy transition and making sure that all of the different government departments are aligned and on the same pathway. I think that's all I will say for now. So happy to engage in a discussion and some questions later.
All right, thank you very much, Russell. If I may conclude from what you just stated now, is that there's actually money globally available for the investment in renewable energy, but the problem is how can we direct the monies to the activities that we want to support, and that it is important for us to have a certainty or clarity of the long-term target in renewable energy, so that we can give confidence for the investors or developers of renewable energy later on. And also, I think what's interesting that you say that everyone in the government should be involved and work collectively to be aligned in the same pathways. So thank you, Russell, and thank you all for your comments. Okay, I will next move to the discussion session part. My first question to all the panelists is, so the COVID pandemic has happened for about 2 years, and we have seen some positive impacts to the environments where the emissions actually were lower due to the decrease in fossil fuel combustions or fossil fuel related activities. And this gives an opportunity for us to start low carbon development actually. So my question is, how can we utilize the pandemic as a momentum to accelerate the decarbonation effort through renewable energy financing, while also ensuring economic growth? Maybe I will start with Russell.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good question. Yeah, I think it's clear that obviously what we have seen is emissions have broadly been a lot lower during the COVID pandemic than they were otherwise, and obviously that shows that if you slow down economic activity and have imposed lockdowns on populations, you can slow down emissions. I don't think anyone is suggesting that that's the best way to deal with greenhouse gas emissions. You need to align both economic growth or economic activity and low carbon to achieve that. But I think so. What it does show is that there is now an opportunity, as in many places we start to move out of the pandemic and economies are starting to unlock and open up, that we can look at a different way of particularly thinking about infrastructure. How we develop infrastructure. So really say, okay, people use the phrase "build back better," and I think that goes back to the comment I was making earlier in terms of, are we clear that in terms of the policies that governments will now put in place to emerge from the pandemic, are they aligned with achieving a net zero future, or at least aligned with the national climate change policies, so that when they do start to see, say, large infrastructure projects going ahead, that it's clear that they are going ahead in a way that is done in the most sustainable way and is reducing emissions. Now, I think the other thing to add then is that I suspect most of the panelists would agree. I suspect that even though economies will open up, we're unlikely to see the level of business travel that we have seen in the past. I'm certainly aware that I've been able to do a lot of the work that we would do normally by traveling via this kind of format, and whilst it's not ideal, we wouldn't want to do it all the time. You can actually use these much more, and you can reduce the amount of business travel you do. So I think we are going to start to see some changes in the way we do things. But I say in particular, it's really an opportunity. And so going back to what I was saying in my response earlier, is to make sure that the policies that are coming out, that are put in place to help economies recover from the pandemic, are aligned with also achieving a net zero. And effectively, you can effectively kill two birds with one stone. You can achieve your economic development through continued development, but then also you can do that in a way that delivers sustainable infrastructure and low carbon energy transition.
All right, great. Next, perhaps I want to hear from Sirpa.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I would echo what Russell just said. Basically, to say that while it's not desirable what happened in terms of the consumption over the COVID period, and that we all very painfully know, it goes to show that the benefits of a low carbon economy, and how much we can do more with our natural endowments, how the cities can look like when they are clean of the carbon soot that stems from the current use of energy and the fossil fueled economies. And what I would say is that the pandemic-induced recession now is starting to taper at least we all hope so, that will take root. But most importantly, it's important to make investments that create stimulus for economic growth and job growth. And that stimulus should be designed in a way that we directly move to low carbon economies through investments in energy transition areas, including the renewable energy and the related grid investments that are required to be able to facilitate that. This is also the International Monetary Fund's recommendation globally, that we make these investments thinking about the climate change and pursuing the Paris climate goals. And what's really important here is that we have a chance to use these enormous resources that are available, that are very sensitive to the climate change goals right now, to develop a new underpinning for a modern economy, more diversified economy in Indonesia, where employment will be very meaningful and moving towards knowledge-based economy and services, and one where the stakeholders will have much more opportunities to create better and greater livelihoods. Russell said about building back better. So indeed, building back better toward a new economy, one that is innovative and is based on knowledge, as well as provides communities opportunities to move away from the more, let's say, mundane, dirtier jobs, to clean jobs and rewarding lifestyles where everyone is involved in the solutions through use of energy. And the cities that work on electricity-driven economies, where knowledge is at the center of this, we have an excellent opportunity to now implement these resources with the climate change goals in mind toward a low carbon economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sirpa. Now I would like to move to Pak Edwin. Pak, silahkan untuk menjawab pertanyaannya.
Saya sepakat dengan opini yang disampaikan Russell dan Sirpa, mungkin sebagai complementary opini ya. Kita juga melihat pandemi COVID itu membuat banyak investasi mengalami rescheduling, tentunya karena resesi dan bleak outlook outlook yang berat membuat banyak investasi, khususnya investasi di bidang infrastruktur yang mengalami rescheduling dan penundaan. Ini momentum yang tepat ya bagi kita untuk menata atau meredesain investasi yang tertunda tadi untuk atau ke arah investasi yang lebih low carbon sifatnya. Misalnya saja kami di PT SMI terlibat ya di dalam penataan investasi transport perkotaan ya. Mungkin untuk kota Semarang yang nantinya akan berbasis listrik. Nah, jadi hal-hal tersebut ya yang memang upaya-upaya yang mendorong investasi yang lebih low carbon emission itu dapat ditata ulang, dan hal lain juga perlu kami sampaikan. SMI terlibat sangat dalam di dalam program pemulihan ekonomi nasional lewat pinjaman daerah. Nah, itu juga salah satu upaya yang dapat kami lakukan untuk lebih meningkatkan pinjaman daerah yang memang nantinya lebih berkualitas pembangunan infrastrukturnya, termasuk berkualitas dari sisi proyek-proyeknya akan lebih lower emission ya. Jadi hal-hal tersebut yang bisa berjalan paralel dapat diupayakan untuk kita kembali ke level normal dengan kualitas pembangunan yang lebih baik.
Oke, baik Pak Edwin, atas penjelasannya terima kasih. Dan terakhir mungkin dari Pak Denny, silakan Pak Denny.
Baik, terima kasih sebelumnya sudah disampaikan banyak oleh Bapak Russell, Bapak Edwin, dan Ibu Sirpa. Memang kondisi saat ini kita bisa melihat dari dua sisi ya, positif dan negatif gitu. Dan kami melihat memang proses green recovery ini seharusnya mendukung untuk peningkatan green economy. Tadi Pak Edwin sudah menyampaikan bagaimana PEN digunakan untuk infrastruktur yang lebih baik gitu, dan itu juga yang menjadi concern kami sebenarnya untuk melihat bagaimana proses ini bisa dilakukan oleh key stakeholder di sektor energi, terutama Kementerian Energi mungkin ataupun PT PLN gitu yang juga menggunakan dana PEN misalnya, dan bagaimana hal ini bisa mendukung proses green recovery yang menjadi green economy, itu memang yang perlu dilakukan dengan baik. Karena kami melihat sendiri juga bagaimana Kementerian Keuangan berusaha dengan sangat maksimal. Terima kasih sebelumnya untuk Bapak Ibu dari Kementerian Keuangan yang berupaya untuk mengatur tata kelola keuangan di masa pandemi ini yang mungkin berbeda dari sebelumnya gitu, dan kami melihat bagaimana perjuangan itu sudah dilakukan dengan maksimal. Nah, bagaimana perjuangan ini bisa mendukung peningkatan green economy, itu yang mungkin perlu dilakukan. Dan kami melihat misalnya di LCDI beberapa rekomendasi sudah disampaikan, misalnya yang berdiskusi dengan stakeholder ataupun pihak-pihak terkait ataupun juga dengan DPR sebagai legislatif di negara ini, bagaimana hal itu memang dijadikan suatu kerangka acuan atau kebijakan, itu mungkin penting adanya gitu, karena bagaimanapun apabila ini hanya tidak terikat sifatnya, mungkin saja kita memang berupaya untuk memulihkan green recovery, belum tentu green, tapi bagaimana kita tetap memperhatikan aspek green itu, dan mungkin itu ya, dan kita saat ini sepertinya jauh lebih baik dalam konteks COVID. Nah, mungkin ada beberapa hal yang juga terus dikembangkan, dan terutama juga melihat bagaimana net zero emission itu jadi bagian dalam atau terkait dengan proses COVID yang sudah ada saat ini, itu juga perlu diamati secara sesama gitu, karena bagaimanapun dalam konteks environmental mungkin ada hal-hal yang disebabkan oleh ketidakbijaksanaan kita dalam memperlakukan lingkungan sehingga COVID ini muncul misalnya. Jadi hal-hal itu mungkin yang perlu kita pikirkan ke masa depan kita, bagaimana pembangunan juga memperhatikan aspek bukan hanya sosial ekonomi tapi lingkungan.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Denny. Mungkin tadi dari pembahasan yang sudah ada, saya memiliki kayak following questions. So what is the best strategy for Indonesia to encourage non-government investments to finance the decarbonation of the energy system, and then at the same time limiting financing for projects that are or that would lead to the carbon lock-in? Perhaps because Pak Denny tadi barusan sudah mulai mention sedikit mengenai bagaimana peran pemerintah, mungkin saya akan mulai dari Pak Denny duluan. Silakan Pak.
Sorry ya, terima kasih sebelumnya. Ya, mungkin seperti yang disampaikan sebelumnya dalam presentasi saya ya, bagaimana policy de-risking ini juga diperkuat gitu, bukan hanya berakhir di studi ataupun diskusi, tapi bagaimana ada upaya-upaya yang membangun market itu lebih menarik di negara kita, terutama untuk mendukung energi transisi atau deep dekarbonisasi yang kita sedang lakukan. Hal ini tentu saja perlu melibatkan pihak, dan misal ya dalam konteks ada konteks tertentu yang melihat bagaimana PT PLN menjadi bottleneck misalnya. Sebenarnya menurut hemat kami, bagaimana kita mendukung PT PLN, bagaimana skema-skema pembiayaan itu bisa masuk gitu, dan tentu saja PT PLN akan sangat bergantung pada kebijakan pemerintah atau support terintegrasinya kebijakan yang ada misalnya untuk perusahaan PT PLN, dan ini yang perlu kita diskusikan atau perlu kita pertajam bersama-sama gitu, bagaimana hal ini bisa bukan malah menambah beban baru ketika harus beralih ke energi transisi, tapi bagaimana kita melihat ini secara win-win solution, dan saya lihat sih sebenarnya investasi seperti yang disampaikan Sirpa ataupun Russell sebelumnya, ataupun mungkin Pak Edwin juga yang banyak donor ataupun lembaga pembiayaan yang masuk melalui SDG Indonesia One, sebenarnya Indonesia menarik untuk market ini gitu, untuk banyak pihak menganggap bahwa market ini akan terbentuk dengan cepat ataupun menarik di negara kita. Nah, hanya saja memang perlu ada trigger-trigger yang bisa membuka hal itu gitu, dan sepertinya policy de-risking bisa membantu dalam beberapa aspek untuk membuka atau misalnya mengkatalis kondisi yang ada. Mungkin itu dari saya.
Baik, mungkin Pak Edwin bisa menyampaikan pendapatnya.
Kami sebagai SMV di bawah Kementerian Keuangan, tentunya menjadi juga bagian dari alat fiskal ya, daripada Kementerian Keuangan untuk tujuan-tujuan ya yang inline dengan upaya-upaya mendorong investasi atau pembangunan ke arah low carbon emission. Nah, tentunya dalam kapasitas kami, upaya-upaya tersebut ya, yang dalam kendali kami terus ya berinisiatif ya, membangun katakanlah blended platform SDG Indonesia One ya, untuk bisa meng-ensure ya multi stakeholders participation di dalam mendorong tadi upaya pembangunan yang lebih berorientasi low carbon emission. Itu satu hal. Hal lain tentunya kami juga tidak bisa berjalan sendirian. Saya rasa mungkin yang dalam kendali kami adalah juga mulai lebih menerapkan standar ya yang kami terapkan di dalam pembiayaan ya, standar ESG ya, tentunya menjadi domain di dalam penerapan kami melakukan pembiayaan agar ya tadi pembiayaan kami juga orientasinya lebih ke hijau, dan itu kami koordinasikan secara erat dengan Kementerian Keuangan karena ada memang hal-hal yang menjadi fiscal constraint ya dari Indonesia dan tentunya juga apa namanya ya ke arah pembangunan yang lebih berorientasi lower emission juga tidak bisa juga kontradik juga dengan upaya-upaya untuk mensejahterakan masyarakat secara umum. Nah, itu yang mungkin keseimbangan itu yang perlu dijaga agar akhirnya pembangunan memang bisa menghasilkan output dan outcome yang lebih baik. Saya rasa itu yang dapat saya sampaikan.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Edwin. Sirpa, could you also respond to the question?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So I think I want to emphasize what we have said already, basically to bring the government together with the development partners under one structured roadmap that we can all endorse and we can all begin to support. And I encourage very much to set up a kind of accountability indicators or results indicators for all parties involved, so that all the efforts will bear the fruit that we expect them and work together. I think the measures that we have mentioned are really important. Reviving the subsidy reform from a year ago and bringing it to implementation. And what does that require? That requires concerted government, unified government, to implement a reform like that, which is very multifaceted, and where again, it's clear and important to amplify that the government has many partners that are very dedicated and can understand the local conditions. Today's development partner is not just a number of expats flying in and out of Jakarta. It's really the Indonesians that work in the international organizations, and we are happy to have that kind of situation where the local knowledge is now integrated with the international organizations. We are in it together. creating a level playing field is critical as well. I think it was mentioned earlier, so that the new developers can profitably from the private sector come into financing large-scale projects for renewable energy. So that calls for carbon pricing, leveling the playing field in terms of the impact that the current polluters are causing onto the economy, making sure that the playing field is indeed level in terms of the pricing. So together, the subsidy reform and carbon pricing will work wonders into changing the landscape of the energy transition domain. I'd also say that we have a lot of opportunities to finance diagnostic needs to phase out the current coal-fired power production facilities, and also to review what can be done to abate the planned coal-fired power plants. So there's a two-faceted approach there, reviewing the repurposing opportunities for the existing capacity, and then diagnosing what is required to abate the plant capacity. Then investment conditions, we can look at how developers are viewing the sector. And I think this may mean, and it was mentioned here earlier, that we are looking at a new PTPLN, a new style of an operation that would make space for effective renewable auction market, battery energy storage market, and ancillary services market mechanisms. And again, that will require analytical work to identify how PTPLN should be changing to become a modern utility going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sirpa. Now I would just repeat the question again. So for Russell, what is the best strategy for Indonesia to encourage non-government investments to finance the decarbonation of the energy system, and at the same time limiting financing for projects that would lead to carbon lock-in? Go ahead, Russell.
Yeah, thanks for that, and so I think would agree with the previous comments. But I think there's two particular things. I think one is around this coordination, so and direction. So has the government set a very clear decarbonisation target? So it's very clear that it wants private investors to focus on lower carbon energy technologies rather than high carbon energy technologies, and obviously. Carbon pricing mechanism is one way of doing that. Having the targets in place that just drive that emission reduction over time is another way of doing it. I think it's really important. We've said several times, I think in answer to most of the questions, having that really clear direction of travel from the government is really important. And often that's what investors will be looking for, is to be clear about if they're making an investment today, it's clear that it's part of a broader strategy, and it's clear that the government has a long commitment to in this case low carbon. And I think that it is the coordination, and obviously what the private sector faces in terms of the barriers is could be quite different to others. And so again, making sure you're having that coordination with the private sector to really understand what are the barriers they're facing, what is it they want to see happening in Indonesia to make Indonesia an attractive investment destination for them. Again, as we've said before, there is plenty of private sector organizations looking to invest in low carbon energy, and it won't be surprising for me to say they'll be looking for the easiest place to invest that money. So again, understanding what Indonesia can do to make Indonesia an easy place for that money to flow is something, again, I think in terms of the government having a dialogue with both the private sector to understand what some of those barriers are, and it's really clear what those barriers are, and then making a commitment to removing them. I think again, I think everyone understands that, as has been outlined in number of the interventions so far, there are a range of different barriers facing particularly investment in renewable energy. And I think the recognition of the government that they understand there are those barriers and have put in place clear processes whereby they will work with the private sector and others to help remove those barriers. As has been said several times, there's plenty of support available from various different donors and programs to help the government understand how it could remove those barriers in terms of, say, providing technical assistance and being able to learn lessons from other jurisdictions. But like I say, I think you really can't go past the need for that firm commitment both to the long-term emission reduction target and then a firm commitment to understand and we start looking at how they can remove those barriers to that investment.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Now, it has been mentioned a little bit here and there about how the government have to collaborate with other institutions. So I think it's important for us to see that there are opportunities from other countries, multilateral organizations, or international financial institutions that can assist Indonesia to realize its decarbonization target. So my question to Sirpa, and I guess also to Russell, is how can these partnerships or alternative funding sources be utilized by Indonesia, and how important are they to accelerate the decarbonization effort in the country? Sirpa, maybe you can go ahead first.
Sure, thank you. Well, you're asking the same question that we've been talking about now, I guess, over and over. And yes, first of all, the partnerships are extremely critical, and the partnerships already exist. So it's a good situation. So what we need to do now is to capitalize and move forward and to bring this partnership to a fruition where we actually all buy into one roadmap. And we have two very large development banks that are constantly gearing up to provide support to such a roadmap from the investment perspective, as well as from a technical assistance side. We have a number of bilateral development banks, French, German development banks, as well as others that can augment that assistance that is available from the Global World Bank and Asian Development Bank. On top of that, we have many of entities that can really help to bring partners together. And what we have suggested is that we would establish a communications group, which would have a small secretariat that would provide for the day-to-day legwork to ensure that there is a repository of documents and exchange of information so that everyone is always informed of progress, and that brings increasingly the government parties together, not just the highest echelons with the high-level political decision makers, but really all echelons, with all echelons of the international organizations and platforms such as the partnership that I represent here today. So a comprehensive consultative group or knowledge and communications group. We can establish a very savvy title for it, and then define how the various partners can play a role, a constructive role and accountable role in ensuring that we are actually tackling the barriers that Russell already mentioned and by Edwin as well. So I think one of the interesting things here is how much the surrounding countries have also influenced the dialogue in Indonesia. So the East Asian economies have made quite significant statements, and we just heard at the UN General Assembly meeting a couple of days ago from the Chinese leadership on how they have now closed the chapter on financing new coal facilities. So we expect that most East Asian, we hope that all East Asian entities will take that leadership to their own business models, and also that in Indonesia we move towards that. And what's really positive here is how the dialogue has progressed. So we are really talking about issues like transitioning away from coal in Indonesia today, which probably was not all that comfortable or easily imaginable just 6 months ago, a year ago. So it's really a pleasure to see how the world community, the region's community is seeing the things in the same way. And obviously we have a lot of colleagues still to convert to talk to bring to the understanding on how actually everybody can benefit from energy transition. There will be no one left behind. It doesn't have to be that way. We can develop programs, again, in partnership to address everyone's needs. Those that are standing to lose can start to look into new capacity building programs and new industries and services and new type of economies in their communities. So the partnership word there is really key, and it's not a soft discussion. It's establishing platforms that work on a basis of accountability and mutual responsibility to the objectives that we all can buy into. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So,
Yes, go ahead, Russell.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with everything that Sirpa said. I think that key one is around the dialogue and the Indonesian government, finding a way or convening some form of communication platform or forum to talk to all of the different donors that are currently offering to provide support to the Indonesian government on particular energy transition. So that from a donor side, and as someone who is representing the donor program, so we can all be clear what are the real challenges that the Indonesian government is facing in trying to understand in relation to energy transition. And we can then work within ourselves and with the other partners to say, okay, now we have effectively a list of the issues that really concerned, of the issues the country wants to understand or the Indonesian wants to understand. We can then work out how each of us might develop a series of activities that deliver and help remove and deliver on some of those issues. I think that dialogue between all the various different parties who are offering support to Indonesia with the Indonesian government. So it's effectively have a shared understanding of what the challenges are and have a shared understanding of how all the support that Indonesia is being provided can help remove those barriers. So yeah, definitely support the suggestions that Sirpa's been putting forward around building better coordination and communication between all the different development and donor partners and the Indonesian government.
Okay, thank you, Russell and Sirpa. Maybe a little bit of a following question to Russell, because we know that the infrastructure that we just mentioned about the enabling the smart grid and stuff like that, it will play a crucial role for the realizing decarbonization, but then it costs a lot. So maybe my question is, what is the best strategies or policies to implement Indonesia to finance infrastructure development in particular?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, again, and I know I've said it several times, I think it's quite important is to have that overarching direction that say, it's very clear that, infrastructure that's built in Indonesia, needs to be aligned with its climate change commitment. And obviously that will then mean that when infrastructure developers and the government is looking to develop infrastructure, they will have that in mind. Yeah, and then secondly, so I think going back to I think the question around donor support available for projects. I mean, clearly some of the technologies we're talking about, particularly in terms of the integration of smart grid, decentralizing grids, which is as you move towards a more renewable dominated grid, it becomes more decentralized. That technology right now, obviously, has a cost. But again, I think there are programs available, World Bank, ADB, number of other multilaterals to help support that. I think this goes back to, again, that coordination between the Indonesian government and the various different donors, to be clear about what are the things that Indonesia is really looking to try and do, and then how can the donors between them support it. And again, I know obviously I represent a program funded by the UK government. I know there are other programs supported by the country. And I think we're all really keen to see how can we bring the expertise that exists, say in this case, how can we bring the expertise that exists in the UK about how you integrate renewables into a grid to countries like Indonesia, so they can learn from those other countries in terms of how they, and understand the cost and how those particular countries dealt with the potential initial short-term increase in costs in terms of implementing some of those technologies. But I think we know that there is that support available, and it's about making sure Indonesia is plugged into those right discussions to be able to access that support, to be able to implement those solutions.
All right, thank you. Now we are going to move to the question and answer section. Here we have some question and I will read it out loud to you. The first one is from Alpin Wu. He asked that when will Indonesia start to apply carbon trading? And is there any scheme for energy reform or transition? Maybe Pak Denny, can you answer this?
Yeah, thank you. To avoid misunderstanding, maybe I answer in bahasa. Ya, menurut kami memang kerangka regulasinya sudah dibangun ya, terutama carbon pricing dan juga carbon tax. KLHK dan Kemenkeu menjadi lead dalam proses ini, dan bagaimana Perpres untuk karbon itu juga sudah dikembangkan, tapi masih dalam proses. Kami rasa ada internal proses yang harus dilalui dan mungkin setelah itu bisa berjalan lebih baik. Dan carbon tax juga saya lihat ada beberapa media menyampaikan bagaimana hal ini juga dibahas dengan legislatif. Itu juga menjadi suatu progres yang menandakan bahwa memang negara kita serius ke arah sana. Mengenai waktu sendiri, kami berharap ya memang kerangka kebijakan ini butuh waktu ya, dalam pengalaman pembuatan Perpres mungkin setahun 2 tahun gitu, dan ini ya semoga Bapak Ibu dari pemerintah bisa segera mengeksekusinya demi membuka akses ini. Dan memang kalau pengalaman sebelumnya dalam proses mainstreaming climate change di Indonesia, waktu itu Bappenas dan akhirnya KLHK gitu, kami melihat bahwa dalam konteks pembiayaan bukan hanya bergantung pada carbon trade sebenarnya gitu. Bagaimana menggunakan mekanisme climate finance yang sudah ada, yang kebanyakan dari antaranya juga terkait dengan isu energi, clean energy, itu memang bisa kita grab peluangnya dan kita manfaatkan secara maksimal. Mungkin itu input dari saya, komen dari saya. Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Denny. Ini juga ada pertanyaan dari Rizky. One source of investment is also coming from the public or people in general. One man may be small, people who cooperate may accumulate a huge amount of investment. Are there any example or case studies of public financing or co-financing that could provide an investment of energy transition? And are there special strategies to tap this source of investment? Perhaps Pak Edwin mungkin bisa membantu untuk menjawab.
Okay, thank you. I think public finance and private finance ya, itu bisa berjalan paralel ya, khususnya dalam konteks KPBU ya, dan saya lihat viability gap itu adalah hal yang bisa didorong dari sisi public finance agar proyek-proyek lower emission ya, itu bisa lebih atraktif bagi investors dan malah bisa mendorong cross border investment. Nah, memang kalau kita bicara mengenai public finance, ini kan ada tata cara ya, ada tata cara dan tata kelola yang mesti ditempuh, intinya agar penggunaan dari public money tersebut ya bisa memastikan bahwa proyek di-procure atau diadakan secara best competitive bidding prosesnya, dan hal tersebut hal yang lazim ya, dan kami di PT SMI telah berkali-kali memfasilitasi ya sesuatu mekanisme pengadaan KPBU yang mana kami menjadi PDF, Project Development Facilitator, dan saya rasa ke depan menjadi sangat baik ya, dialog dan penyamaan pandangan dan upaya-upaya untuk meningkatkan bankability dari project dan investment climate dilakukan secara koordinatif ya, agar ya Indonesia bisa menjadi atau bisa memberikan daya tarik bagi investor untuk pengadaan proyek-proyek renewable energy dan lower carbon emission ya ke depannya untuk kebaikan kita bersama. Saya rasa itu.
Okay, thank you, Pak Edwin. Maybe Sirpa and Russell, can you give us examples from the cases abroad that would maybe give an insight for the Indonesian government on this issue? Sirpa?
If I have your question correctly, you are talking about blending public and private finance. So oftentimes, again, sort of concerted efforts to bring these two sources together are helpful in, for instance, setting up a public-private partnership units that can develop the partnerships and integrate public resources. And it's not only finance, it can be other resources together with the developers' interests. And I understand that Indonesia also is executing such modalities frequently. So that's one modality, but I think it's more important is really to get the prices right and to make sure that the private capital actually can come into the country. And here, as you know, private investor is seeking profit and has many destinations and opportunities to choose from. So the risk and the profitability need to be commensurate with one another. And one of the very important things is that there is a level playing field. So rules are very clear, as well as the pricing is transparent and offers opportunities for all the technologies. So the technologies and the technological price developments can actually filter into Indonesia as well. So what I mean here is that the renewable energy prices, for instance, have been really plummeting. They're really dramatically reduced now in the global market. For Indonesia to access that, it needs to be reviewing those subsidies. And I'm so happy to hear that the carbon market is already on the drawing board, and other similar carbon pricing measures are also underway. Critically, I guess the carbon pricing can play an enormous role. But I think the first step really is to dismantle the subsidies that are present in the Indonesian economy and now consume something like 10% of the government's expenditure. That's a huge amount of resources that are going into supporting something like stranded assets. Stranded assets, what we consider those to be, is assets that at some point will become unbankable, meaning that they are in the liability book of the government or the state-owned enterprise and need to be paid for over time, but actually no longer serve the purpose in terms of the global pricing developments, meaning that their product is actually more expensive than what competitors can offer it. So the subsidy schemes should be addressed first to set the playing field for the private sector resources to come. When the prices are right, the private sector does not need so many inducements. They find their own ways to the destinations. And while, of course, blended finance and private-public partnership units and the facilities can offer a pathway for directing the private sector investment in where the government may want it most acutely, really the playing field should be the number one task at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Sirpa. Russell, would you like to also answer?
Yeah, hi, yeah, apologies, I didn't get the translation of the original question. Can you just give me the original question again, please?
Okay, it's actually, Is there any example or case studies of public financing or co-financing that could provide an investment of energy transition? And are there special strategies to tap the source of investment?
Sure. So, I think there's two things to say, and actually, again, would agree with everything what Serpa was saying. So, we know that there is a lot of private finance that's keen to invest in renewable energy in particular, and getting the policy settings right for that is the real way you will drive private finance. And you can look across the world at countries that have developed, things like renewable energy auctions, where they're not only getting very low prices for their renewable energy, but also getting a lot of private investment flowing into that country. And so it's not so much about, say, that they're getting the blending of the public and the private. It's about the government, again, setting the right framework. And again, you look across the world, most of the successful renewable energy markets are moving away from feed-in tariff type subsidies towards auction mechanisms where you bring in that competitive tension and the prices are coming down. And again, as Serpa outlined, the private sector is very comfortable with those and finds works out its own way of getting involved in that market. And that's something that, again, is really useful to look at in terms of, again, how you can government can set the policy right, and the private sector will flow into where the market is. And the other thing you can look at, and again, Indonesia is already doing that, is looking at things like the bond market. So, Indonesia is one of the leaders in terms of issuing sovereign green sukuks into the market, which are being done to finance a whole range of activities that in relation to climate change. And so there are instruments that the public sector can use to access private finance, say through things like using things like bonds. And say, again, Indonesia has been very successful at issuing sovereign green sukuks to support a lot of its climate change action, and we're assuming that would continue. But actually, I think where the big prize is around aligning your policy settings, in this case, in particular in the renewable energy sector, but then you can attract the private finance.
Okay, thank you, Russell. And I think this is the last question from Dean Suryadi. He said that the energy subsidy realization for fuel, LPG, and electricity for the last few years has reached 100 trillion Indonesian rupiah every year, or about 7 alone. And most of this number is used to support fossil fuel consumption. In what way do you think the subsidy could be better used to support the decarbonization effort? Maybe I start with Pak Denny, and I think this would be for all the panelists.
Ya, thank you. Kami melihatnya bahwa secara organisasi GIZ memang mendukung Kementerian Keuangan juga untuk melakukan studi bagaimana subsidi ini dialihkan untuk clean energy. Jadi memang kami sedang dalam proses itu gitu. Dan tentu saja ketika kami berada di satu sisi bagaimana mengoptimalisasi subsidi ini, perlu juga kesepakatan terutama dengan Kementerian Energi, PT PLN ataupun pihak-pihak yang berkepentingan lainnya, karena ini isu yang besar menurut hemat kami gitu. Dan tapi dalam konteks dukungan GIZ, kami mencoba membantu bagaimana subsidi ini bisa dialihkan. Sebenarnya kami juga pernah dulu terlibat dalam misalnya inisiasi BPDLH yang mendapat beberapa triliun dari BLU Kehutanan. Akan ada top up dari Kementerian Keuangan untuk bisa mengutilisasi BPDLH dalam mendukung clean energy saat itu gitu. Nah, proses-proses seperti ini sebenarnya sudah diinisiasi di lingkup Kementerian Keuangan. Nah, bagaimana hal ini bisa diimplementasikan lebih lanjut, karena tentu saja seperti yang kami sampaikan sebelumnya akan ada beberapa pihak yang terdampak ketika misalnya kebijakan ini dialihkan atau dirubah. Nah, bagaimana negosiasi, diskusi atau kesepakatan itu bisa dibangun, kami siap mendukung pemerintah Indonesia. Terima kasih.
Baik, Pak Edwin mungkin bisa menjawab berikutnya.
Ini soal pilihan kebijakan ya. Saya rasa memang shifting ya dari subsidi nggak langsung menjadi subsidi langsung itu memang menjadi kunci ya. Tapi lagi-lagi seperti yang Pak Denny sampaikan, cara mengalihkan ya mekanisme subsidi tersebut kan tentu saja ada implikasi ya, pihak-pihak yang terdampak dan pihak-pihak yang akan mendapat insentif yang harusnya untuk mendorong pengembangan ke arah energi terbarukan tadi. Nah, saya sepakat tuh dengan Pak Denny, mungkin perlu dipikirkan dan dihitung secara matang dan bagaimana pengalihan mekanisme subsidi tersebut memang dapat berjalan dengan tujuannya, yaitu tetap memberi proteksi bagi masyarakat terdampak, sisi mendorong penggunaan energi yang lebih ramah lingkungan.
Okay, maybe Sirpa and Russell, can you give the final comments?
Just so quickly, very quickly, thank you. So we are really going back to the very first point that we all were making about the very huge ask for resources to make Indonesian NDC through and to bring much greater renewable energy into energy mix. So when we look around and ask who's responsible for funding it, I was kind of delighted that the audience said that government has a big responsibility, and it goes back to the policy context once again. So I think there is really a clear pot for some of those resources just within the government to make those adjustments in terms of the policy context. But I also very much agree with Edwin. We would have to define what are the implications of withdrawing the subsidy and at what timeline can it be done, and who are the real losers at the sort of low income household level. And of course, we all know that these subsidies are sort of not directly aligned with the poverty reduction and improvement of the livelihoods of the lowest income households, that it's actually benefiting economy-wide various entities, industries, even at large scale. So they first of all need to be reviewed carefully to ensure that the impacts that we are talking about are really related to the lowest segment of the economy, the households that have difficulties making do without that subsidy. And there we need to analyze what other measures can we define and design to directly address their conditions and concerns. But then going back to the whole point about how do we foot the bill for the energy transition, here is part of the answer. It is really those adjustments within the government's own budget that need to be made. And you also will have all the necessary counterparts in just that one measure for all the international community to be aligned and ready to support the government with additional resources at multiple levels. So I think we have arrived at the beginning of taking the first steps to revive the policy agenda, to make concerted efforts together. As I said earlier, we are in it, all of us. We all have a great interest in Indonesian welfare and improvement of livelihoods for everyone in Indonesia. So I look forward to this partnership and us working together going forward with all of you in the audience. Thank you.
All right, lastly, Russell.
Hi, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, yeah, my headphones have stopped working. I think the only thing I'd say, I think just agreeing with everything else has said, but saying I think just focus on what the outcome of the subsidy is for. So if the outcome of the subsidy or the objective of the subsidy is, say, to deliver low electricity prices to consumers,
there are lots of ways that can be delivered without having to be a direct subsidy to the fossil fuel sector. And we're seeing, again, a lot of other jurisdictions where the cheapest way of providing electricity to some consumers is not through, say, fossil fuels, and not through subsidizing fossil fuel generation, is providing another range of services. So it is looking at, say, what's the outcome of the subsidy, and again, as a number of you said, making it technology neutral. So again, they may be focused on what the outcome you want to achieve, rather than the technology to provide that outcome. So in this case, rather than just giving a subsidy for fossil fuel generation, if the subsidy is about, or support is about delivering low electricity prices to consumers, focus the subsidy on providing that outcome, and there can be a range of different ways that can be delivered, say, without it being a direct subsidy solely to fossil fuel generation.
All right, thank you, Russell. Now our session has come to an end, but before I close the session, I would like to ask our panelists here to give a 1-minute closing statement, and we will start with Pak Denny. Go ahead, Pak Denny.
Baik, terima kasih atas kesempatannya. Semoga ITD terus berlanjut di tahun-tahun mendatang. Bagaimana platform ini bisa mempengaruhi banyak pihak itu sangat penting menurut kami, dan contohnya misalnya bagaimana keterlibatan pihak-pihak yang belum disebut juga dalam diskusi kali ini seperti media itu menjadi sangat krusial ya, karena kami melihat beberapa event sebelumnya yang dipimpin oleh media berhasil mengundang langsung Bapak Presiden ataupun Menteri selaku pengambil keputusan. Jadi bagaimana diskusi-diskusi macam ini terus dibangun, semoga bisa terus berlanjut dan membuahkan hasil yang baik. Kami terima kasih untuk event ini, dan kami juga ada beberapa event lain yang kami rasa menarik seperti coal face down dan juga multi stakeholder discussion yang akan kami lakukan. Kami akan tertarik apabila Bapak Ibu terlibat juga dalam diskusi tersebut. Terima kasih sebelumnya.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Denny. Berikutnya Pak Edwin, silakan Pak untuk closing statement-nya.
Terima kasih. Saya mendukung continuity dari platform ini ya, platform Indonesia Energy Dialogue, Energy Transition Dialogue. Saya rasa forum yang bagus bagi kita multi stakeholders untuk mendapat atau berdiskusi, berdialog untuk masing-masing bisa saling berperan ya di dalam merealisasikan Indonesia energy transition ke depannya. Saya rasa itu.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Edwin. Sirpa, your 1-minute closing statement, please. Hello, Sirpa?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Yes. Really appreciate being able to participate in the Indonesian Energy Transition Dialogue, and congratulations again for your 4th session. Wanted to remind you about the seed capital that is available in the ETP Energy Efficiency Innovation window. This window is available for innovative projects in the energy efficiency area. So please contact us for information about this program and all the templates and application forms. Also, we are very soon launching Energy Transition Roundtable. It's something like a practitioner's executive MBA type program that will help access to tools and concepts. And then finally, I want to say that we will be working on this one roadmap that all of us can buy into for energy transition, and that our senior country program coordinator and manager in Indonesia is Paan Darmawan. Many of you know him, so he's your ETP officer in Jakarta. Please contact him so that we can stay in touch and work in partnership. Thank you again.
All right, thank you, Sirpa. And lastly, Russell, your closing statement.
Yeah, thank you. And again, as everyone else done, thanks to the organisers for this session. It's been really, really helpful. And I guess the two things I would say is, one is obviously, as I think all of us have said many times, the importance of that strong government commitment to low carbon energy transition that will really drive a lot of the activities that all of us are talking about and supporting. And the second one then is also around this, this dialogue, both in terms of, say, events like today, but also, that more formal dialogue that we've talked about between the government and all the donor partners, to really be clear about, say, what are the challenges that the Indonesian government is really facing in relation to the energy transition, and how can we all make sure that the support we're providing is directed towards those priorities. So certainly from my side, really keen to engage in further dialogues both with the government and other stakeholders, so we're really clear about what support is required and how we can deliver it.
Thank you, Russell. Baik, terima kasih kepada para panelis yang sudah berpartisipasi dalam diskusi yang menarik dan bermakna ini. Dan terima kasih juga kepada para Bapak dan Ibu yang telah bergabung secara virtual di platform ietd.info. Now I'll give the platform back to Arin. Thank you.
Terima kasih Ibu Melina Gabriela dan juga tentunya para narasumber untuk diskusi menarik yang telah kita ikuti bersama pada kesempatan kali ini. Hadirin sekalian, Bapak Ibu yang berbahagia, kita akan lanjutkan pada kesempatan kali ini dengan sesi dialog singkat mengenai Economic Impact of Deep Decarbonization yang akan dipandu oleh Program Manager Green Economy IESR sebagai moderator kita kali ini. Langsung saja kepada Ibu Lisa Wijayani, kami silakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Saya ucapkan selamat datang kepada Bapak dan Ibu peserta Indonesia Energy Transition Dialogue 2021. Hari ini merupakan hari terakhir dari rangkaian kegiatan IETD 2021. Dan sebelum kita mulai berdiskusi dengan kedua narasumber saya pada sesi saat ini, perkenalkan nama saya Lisa Wijayani, saya Program Manager Green Economy di IESR. Dan siang ini saya akan memandu diskusi sampai 1 jam ke depan dengan tema diskusi kita yaitu Economic Impact of Deep Decarbonization. Berbicara mengenai isu energi terbarukan dan bahkan dekarbonisasi secara mendalam sangat tidak lepas dari isu ekonomi di dalamnya, dan pergeseran ke energi terbarukan membawa banyak manfaat yang sangat besar, tidak hanya terhadap unsur ekonomi saja, tapi juga terhadap kesehatan manusia, terhadap kesejahteraan manusia, di mana kita semua bisa hidup terbebas dari bencana alam, dari kerusakan yang terjadi akibat dari bencana atau krisis iklim. Namun untuk mendukung transisi energi menuju ke arah yang lebih baik, harus didukung oleh semua pihak, tidak hanya dari unsur ekonomi saja maupun dari unsur terkait lainnya, pembuat kebijakan, dari para stakeholders yang bekerja di unsur sosial maupun di isu teknis. Nah, jika transisi energi atau deep decarbonization, dekarbonisasi secara mendalam tidak didukung dengan baik, tidak dipandu dengan baik, maka tidak akan memberikan impact secara positif, namun bisa memberikan impact secara negatif. Oleh karena itu, saat ini sudah hadir bersama saya 2 orang narasumber, dan kita akan berdiskusi bagaimana pertumbuhan ekonomi ke depan bisa didukung oleh decarbonization secara mendalam dan memberikan impact yang sangat baik tidak hanya pada sektor ekonomi tapi juga terhadap kehidupan manusia secara umum, baik itu kesehatan maupun juga masa depan anak cucu kita ke depan agar bisa hidup lebih baik lagi. Saya persilakan narasumber pertama saya, Bapak Faisal Basri, yang merupakan ekonomis dan juga member dari Indonesia Clean Energy Forum. Selamat siang, Pak Faisal. Ya, halo Pak Faisal.
Selamat siang Ibu.
Ya, selamat siang Bapak. Sehat ya Pak?
Alhamdulillah baik.
Baik, lalu saya juga punya kedua narasumber, yaitu Dr. Arunabha Ghosh yang merupakan founder dan CEO Council on Energy, Environment and Water, CEEW, India. Good morning, Dr. Ghosh. It's morning in India right now, right?
Good morning.
Yes, thank you
Very nice
for
to
your
be here.
participation. Yes, thank you for your participation for our IET Day 2021. Sebelum saya mulai diskusi kita 1 jam ke depan ini, mungkin saya mau memberikan sedikit pertanyaan awal yang bisa memantik diskusi kita mungkin. Saya belum kasih pertanyaan ini sebelumnya kepada kedua narasumber kita untuk surprise. Jadi saya ingin tahu, menurut Pak Faisal dan juga Dr. Ghosh di sini yang mungkin sangat expert di bidang ekonomi dan juga kebijakan terkait ekonomi yang mendukung dekarbonisasi. Saya ada satu pertanyaan dan saya akan lemparkan dalam bahasa Inggris. Silahkan menjawab yes or no, or disagree or agree. Pertanyaan saya yang pertama, saya punya satu pertanyaan. Pertanyaan saya itu, do you feel positive for the statement saying that decarbonization can drive the force of accelerating economic growth now and in the future? Saya akan mulai dengan Pak Faisal. Silakan Pak. Jawabannya bisa yes or no, agree or disagree.
Agree.
Agree. Okay. Now, what about Dr. Ghosh? I would like to hear from you.
Sorry, I heard your question in Bahasa, I think. So could you repeat it in English, please?
Okay. So the question, do you feel positive for the statement saying that decarbonization can drive the force of accelerating economic growth now and in the future?
Sorry, I'm very sorry. The interpretation switches to Bahasa. Please, could you repeat that question once again?
Okay. I will repeat once more. So do you feel positive for the statement saying that decarbonization can drive the force of accelerating economic growth now and in the future?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So, saya akan mulai dulu dengan Pak Faisal, dengan jawaban Pak Faisal tadi yes. Saya akan mulai mengeksplor dari sudut pandang Pak Faisal sebagai seorang ekonom yang punya track record sangat lama di Indonesia memberikan masukan kepada pemerintah Indonesia dan juga tidak hanya di sektor ekonomi saja ya Pak Faisal, karena sebelumnya Pak Faisal juga sempat menjabati posisi sebagai Ketua Tim Reformasi Tata Kelola Migas yang mungkin sudah banyak insight atau pengalaman di isu-isu energi terbarukan atau sektor energi. Nah, kenapa sih Pak Faisal, apa menurut Pak Faisal, kenapa Pak Faisal yakin dan memberikan statement yes kalau sebenarnya dekarbonisasi itu bisa menjadi satu sebagai unsur yang sangat penting gitu dalam kita mengembangkan ekonomi, tidak hanya sekarang saat kita sedang mengalami krisis dan harus mulai melakukan economic recovery gitu ya, tapi juga di masa depan ketika semua negara mungkin berlomba-lomba untuk memulai atau mencapai pertumbuhan ekonomi yang lebih baik gitu. Silakan Pak Faisal.
Ya, pertama tentu saja new economy itu mengedepankan prinsip keseimbangan triple bottom line antara people, ekonomi, dan lingkungan. Jadi kalau salah satu jomplang itu tidak sustainable. Jadi sustainability bergantung pada kemampuan kita mengelola ekonomi bagi kesejahteraan rakyat yang memperhatikan lingkungan. Tidak ada rumusan lain. Itu yang pertama. Kemudian yang kedua, every crisis, every storm, every shock is an opportunity for all of us to do something new in a different way. Kemudian dalam konteks Indonesia, ya, dalam konteks Indonesia, kita lihat sebelum pandemi sekalipun, ini tidak ada urusannya dengan pandemi, sebelum pandemi sekalipun, kita lihat pertumbuhan ekonomi Indonesia itu melambat. Jadi kesannya ya tenaga kita itu kian hari kian terkikis. Kita butuh tenaga baru, butuh energi baru untuk menggerakkan kembali ekonomi. Nah, gara-gara pandemi, pertumbuhan ekonomi kian melambat. Nah, pertanyaannya mengapa melambat? Ya karena kita melakukan hal yang sama berulang-ulang untuk memperoleh hasil yang berbeda. Ya tidak mungkin. Kita harus melakukan cara-cara baru dengan lebih mengedepankan prinsip transformasi ya dari value extraction ke value creation. Nah, dekarbonisasi itu di mata saya adalah value creation. Selama ini kita value extraction. Kita keruk batu bara, bakar. Nggak pakai otak juga bisa. Nah, oleh karena itulah, maka manfaatnya juga hanya dinikmati oleh segelintir orang. Dan bahayanya dialami oleh semua orang. Kemudian, dekarbonisasi juga tidak semata-mata berdiri sendiri dia, tapi harus diiringi selain oleh transformasi dari value extraction ke value creation, juga harus meningkatkan namanya productivity. Nah, selama ini total faktor productivity kita mengalami perlambatan. Artinya memang Indonesia ini selama ini lengah, terlalu mengandalkan olah otot dan olah keringat, tapi kurang olah otak. Nah, disinilah peluang kita menjadi sedemikian sangat bagus untuk menjadikan ini sebagai momentum ibarat ular ganti kulit untuk memperoleh tenaga yang baru untuk maju lebih kencang menghadapi tantangan-tantangan yang lebih dinamis. Mungkin saya berhenti sampai di situ.
Baik, sangat menarik statement terakhir Pak Faisal. Jadi dulu sebenarnya sebelum COVID pandemi, Indonesia sebenarnya pertumbuhan ekonominya sudah melambat. Tapi sejak COVID ini justru makin melambat gitu ya. Lalu tadi ada statement sebenarnya kalau dekarbonisasi itu transisi Indonesia tidak hanya, kalau saya boleh ambil kesimpulan ya, tidak hanya dari sisi energinya saja, tapi dari human resource-nya juga, yaitu yang tadinya kita lebih banyak explore dan menggunakan otot, sekarang harus lebih pandai dengan menggunakan otak gitu ya Pak ya. Oke, terima kasih Pak Faisal. Saya mau tanya ke Dr. Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh, you said very clearly and confidently, absolutely. So I would really like to know, I would really like to know your opinion. What's behind the reason you are very sure that decarbonization will actually drive the force of economic growth, not just right now, but also in the future? Please go ahead. If I would like to, yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. And once again, many thanks to the organizers, to Indonesia Clean Energy Forum and the Institute for Essential Services Reform. Thank you very much for having me. I want to first start by fully endorsing what Faisal has just mentioned, this kind of move from an extraction-driven economy to a value addition-driven economy. Now, why do I say that I think that the decarbonization agenda will drive growth not just now, but also into the future? There are three reasons. The first is to look at where investment is headed. And if you think about any kind of sunrise sector, sectors that are likely to deliver more growth in future rather than less. So basically you're expecting growth. There are two sectors I can imagine that are not low carbon. One is space tourism, and the other is deep sea mining. Other than that, it is very hard to come across an economic sector that is on the rise and that is also not a low carbon sector. You could be manufacturing textiles, and increasingly investment would be going towards the sectors where you're sourcing sustainable cotton and using sustainable energy to manufacture the textiles. You could be manufacturing steel, and increasingly there will be trade barriers and carbon taxes on high carbon steel, And if you are able to manufacture low carbon steel or even green steel, then your economic opportunity or market opportunity actually begins to increase. So this is one direction. The second reason is where the jobs will come from. If you take coal versus renewables versus even distributed renewables, in India we see, for instance, that distributed renewable energy that's on your rooftop, for instance, creates 7 times more jobs than large-scale renewable energy. And large-scale renewable energy creates more jobs per unit of power generated than coal or natural gas. So if you're looking to create millions or more jobs, then the cleaner energy sectors are going to be more labor intensive. And as our infrastructure, not just in energy, but if you look at cooling services, that's another 200,000 jobs opportunity in India. Green hydrogen, that's a 2 million jobs opportunity in India alone over the next 2 decades. Each of these sectors starts creating more and more additional jobs than had been the case in the past. So that's going to be a second driver. And the third driver is, of course, going to be the planetary imperative. There is no question that countries like Indonesia or India, we are not the culprits for having created the climate crisis. But countries in the developing world are primarily the victims of the climate crisis. So working within the shrinking carbon constraint is going to be something that will be in our own interest to do. Because if we look at the rising climate shocks, it's the low income and low middle income countries that that suffer far greater shares of their national income in terms of losses because of the climate shocks than otherwise. So where is new investment going? Where are the new jobs going to come from? And why the planetary imperative matters for countries like ours. I think these will be 3 key reasons: the jobs, growth, and sustainability agenda that will drive a decarbonized but more prosperous future for us.
Okay, thank you for your explanation, Dr. Ghosh. It's really interesting to know about your point of view, especially about the investment. Like you said, it can be space, tourism or deep sea mining, which is, we don't know whether it's possible or not at the moment, but I know like there is someone who can already work on that globally, but yeah. Talking about decarbonization, maybe it's not, it's a bit impossible at the moment. But another thing that you mentioned about jobs, you mentioned about the creation of jobs from renewable energy and infrastructure. And the last one also, like developing countries have got more impacts, negative impacts, other than compared to developed countries. So I'll go in detail later on, but I'll have a question for both of you. I'll start by questioning Pak Faisal first. Pertanyaan saya adalah saat ini kalau misalkan kita berbicara mengenai economic impact, economic growth gitu ya, dan kita sekarang sedang dalam masa pandemi menuju economic recovery. Sebenarnya kalau ngomongin isu ekonomi, pasti yang terfikir adalah bagaimana membantu rakyat yang kesulitan ekonomi, kehilangan pekerjaan gitu ya. Dan saya lihat di Indonesia dan bahkan juga di India, stimulus-stimulus yang diberikan oleh pemerintah banyak yang fokusnya lebih ke social dan economic impact gitu ya. Tapi balik lagi tadi penjelasan Dr. Ghosh tentang pekerjaan yang bisa diciptakan dari dekarbonisasi ini, yang begitu banyak sebenarnya kesempatannya gitu ya. Nah kalau menurut Pak Faisal dan juga Dr. Ghosh, bagaimana seharusnya kebijakan-kebijakan ini bisa mendukung kita dalam pemulihan ekonomi, jadi mendukung pemulihan ekonomi tapi juga tidak melupakan bahwa ada unsur-unsur yang sangat penting, yaitu masalah iklim, terus juga masalah kesehatan gitu ya. Jadi kira-kira kalau menurut Pak Faisal bagaimana nih Pak? Masih unmute Pak?
Saya ingin share satu slide lagi. Ini ya, kita lihat speed of recovery Indonesia. Ya. Kan di Indonesia banyak, khususnya dari kalangan pemerintah mengatakan, wah kita tumbuh 7,7% gitu ya, dibandingkan dengan triwulan yang sama tahun lalu. Nah, namun kalau kita lihat speed of recovery Indonesia itu tergolong sangat lambat dibandingkan dengan negara-negara tetangga seperti Thailand, Vietnam, Filipina, India. India speed of recovery-nya cepat. Antara lain nanti kita tanya Dr. Ghosh, seberapa jauh kontribusi dari renewable ini. Nah, kalau kita lihat recovery di Indonesia, itu tidak ada hubungannya dengan source of primary energy yang bersumber dari fosil kan. Coba kalau Anda bayangkan di tengah pandemi ini dilakukan upaya luar biasa untuk memulai transisi energi. Jadi misalnya solar panel sudah banyak di mana-mana, kita kan masih sangat sedikit, masih 0, sekian. Maka usaha-usaha kecil bisa merakit panelnya dan macam-macam. Tapi apa yang bisa dilakukan di era pandemi di tengah di bidang batu bara? Ya dia ada pandemi, tidak ada pandemi, dia produksi terus, dia tidak ada hubungannya dengan rakyat, yang bergerak alat berat, jadi ya eksklusif gitu. Bahkan sekarang di era pandemi batu bara memperoleh keuntungan besar, harganya sudah $170 lebih, tapi yang menikmati siapa? Rakyat sama sekali tidak menikmati. Bahkan bisa dikatakan sama sekali tidak menikmati ya, kecuali yang ilegal-ilegal itu. Kemudian kalau era pandemi ini kita bertekad sesuai dengan komitmen pemerintah yang resmi itu, maka segala kegiatan ekonomi yang membutuhkan bantuan pemerintah bisa diterapkan conditionality. Oke, pemerintah membantu, tapi ayo kembangkan solar energy. Nah, tapi yang bisa dimulai adalah bea masuk untuk peralatan solar energy dinolkan. Ya kan? Jadi ada komitmen baru nunjukkan secara nyata polisinya juga paralel dengan komitmen itu. Misalnya kan kalau kita no tax for education gitu ya. Nah, kalau untuk renewable energy, no import duties for renewable energy equipment, seperti itu. Kemudian seperti di negara lain, oke, sekarang airlines mengalami kesulitan. Nah, oke, airlines dibantu oleh pemerintah, tapi syaratnya dia harus energy efficient, gitu. Harus menggunakan cara-cara, misalnya di Jepang itu maskapai penerbangan ANA menggunakan minyak jelantah untuk penerbangan dari Jepang ke beberapa kota di Amerika Serikat. Baru dia dapat bantuan. Nah, di Indonesia yang dapat bantuan apa? Industri mobil yang pakai fossil fuel. Dengan cara apa? PPNBM-nya dinolkan. Jadi enggak ada gitu apa ya. Ya memang baru sebatas komitmen tapi tidak diwujudkan dalam kebijakan-kebijakan nyata. Inilah kesempatan kita untuk bertobat. Karena selama ini telah merusak alam dan akhirnya menyengsarakan ratusan juta rakyat Indonesia.
Ya, baik, terima kasih Pak Faisal. Sangat menarik informasinya. Saya membayangkan kalau misalkan airline menggunakan minyak jelantah gitu ya, sebenarnya bisa itu disuplai oleh UMKM ya atau home industry gitu ya. Jadi sebenarnya tidak melulu stimulus atau support itu hanya ke sektor-sektor yang spesifik ekonomi sosialnya aja gitu. Baik, terima kasih Pak Faisal. Dr. Ghosh, now can you hear me in English already?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Yes,
So,
thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Just to repeat the question and also to add a bit, about the economic policy. How would you think it will be aligned with the economic recovery? And also, Pak Faisal mentioned India actually has quite good improvement in terms of economic recovery. And how would you, the India has made the plan aligning the stimulus, for example, for the economic recovery and also supporting decarbonization. Please, Dr. Ghosh.
Sure, thank you. I think before I talk about India, one of the things that we have to recognize is that the pandemic has delivered a major income shock to the low-income economies or middle-low-income economies across the world. By the World Bank's estimates, more than 100 million people are likely to have gone back into poverty. So all governments will obviously be under pressure to deliver quick recovery to get these people who've fallen back into poverty back above the poverty line. And I can understand that there will be this political pressure to deliver quick growth. The question is, how do we deliver that quick growth, which is not just solving for the current acute crisis of the pandemic, but also consistent with solving for the chronic crisis that the climate change issue presents before us. So let me give some clear examples of how India went about it. Even at the early stages of the pandemic, when the economy was still largely locked down, a few sectors were opened up to be able to get economic activity going. One of those sectors was renewable energy construction activity. So even when the rest of the economy is shut down, the government permitted that the renewable energy projects will continue to get built. The other thing that happened is that the tenders, the auctions for the renewable energy projects continued. The third thing that happened was that priority was given to renewable energy projects or to buy power from them. As Faisal was also saying, that there has been this depression in the demand because of the economic collapse. And then the choice is, when the demand rises up again, do I tap into coal for that extra demand to fulfill that extra demand, or do I tap into renewable energy? And in India, the priority was given to renewable energy. Now, of course, as a result, the thermal power assets have suffered because they are operating at what is called low plant load factors. They are not being used as much. But as a result, you're also nudging the energy sector, the electricity sector, in the cleaner direction. Beyond the energy sector, a couple of other things is worthwhile mentioning. Small businesses. India has 63 million micro, small, and medium enterprises. Energy costs for them is one of the highest shares in terms of the share of input costs. That's what makes them uncompetitive in export markets. Now, investing in energy efficiency is not just good for the environment, but actually makes these small businesses more competitive in the domestic and in the international economy. So my organization at CW, when we brought out the economic recovery plan in June last year, we emphasized a lot on what the small businesses could be doing in terms of giving them a larger share of the stimulus and encouraging them to move towards more energy efficient technologies. And finally, there is the role of the rural economy. We still have more than half our population in rural areas. Now, how have we, one of the ways to deal with this is again tap into the opportunity that exists in using distributed clean energy to drive productive use enterprises in the rural economy. That could be solar irrigation pumps on the farms, or small textile units, or small food processing units, milk chilling units, etc. This, we estimate, is a $50 billion opportunity just in India. In Southeast Asia, again, it's tens of billions. In Sub-Saharan Africa, it's 12 billion. So effectively what I'm highlighting is that, of course, the recovery from the pandemic is critical. But if we think about leveraging your stimulus or leveraging your policy and your regulation in the right direction, prioritizing renewables over coal, prioritizing investment in energy efficiency for micro, small, medium enterprises, and prioritizing the billions of dollars of opportunity in rural enterprises using clean energy, then you are making the recovery more robust, but also socially more inclusive.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. It's really comprehensive, and I do agree with you when you mentioned about especially supporting rural economies. Perhaps I'm not sure if other countries have realized about this, because actually rural economies have also a good role in terms of supporting decarbonization. But I would like to know in details about energy supply and demand in India, because for us, we also have difficulties to providing supplying energy as required by our population, and India is like one of the biggest population in the world. So, what's the environment or the ecosystem of energy in general in India that can be fed by this kind of sustainable energy system at the moment that you just mentioned?
Sure. So India's electricity system today is about 300,000 megawatts. It's one of the world's third or fourth largest electricity system in the world. Now, 10 years ago, we had less than 20 megawatts of solar in the country. Last month, we crossed more than 100,000 megawatts of solar, wind, bioenergy. So we are already at more than a quarter of the electricity system. If you add large hydropower, then about 39% of our electricity capacity now is already using clean energy. India now has a plan to have 450,000 megawatts of renewable energy by 2030, within the next 9 years. Effectively, what that means is we are building more renewable energy capacity this decade than our entire electricity system as it exists, right? So this is, I call it not an energy transition, but an energy revolution. And to do that, you have to not only set the targets, but you also have to use the market-friendly policies to drive down the costs. So the reverse auctions, which India has deployed for a decade, has brought down tariffs for solar, for instance, to about 2.5 cents, 2.7 US cents per unit. I know in Indonesia itself, solar tariffs in 2019 had already dropped to 6 US cents, which were already 25% lower than the power procurement costs of, say, PLN, which was about 7.7 US cents. So already we can see that at the margin, whether it's Indonesia or whether it's India, the cost of renewable energy tariffs is lower. But we have to keep moving in that direction. We have to keep getting rid of the subsidies that fossil fuel gets, and thereby level the playing field and have this leapfrog towards a cleaner energy infrastructure, which also services the rising demand amongst aspirational people in countries like ours.
Oke, baik Pak Faisal, saya sangat ingin tahu bagaimana menurut Pak Faisal, tadi Pak Dr. Ghosh menjelaskan mengenai ini ya, apa namanya, economic recovery di India. Salah satunya tadi juga berbicara mengenai energy efficiency, mengenai rural economies, dan juga tadi kalau disebutkan juga energy supply dan demand di India saat ini juga mayoritas mungkin dari suplainya sudah lumayan besar kontribusi dari renewable energinya. Nah, kalau di Indonesia sendiri, kalau menurut Pak Faisal, mungkin pertama menanggapi pernyataan Dr. Ghosh mengenai energy efficiency yang sudah mulai dilakukan oleh small businesses, lalu juga mengarah ke rural economies juga gitu. Nah, bagaimana pendapat Pak Faisal? Dan yang kedua juga, memang di Indonesia energi supply dan demand-nya seperti apa sih? Kira-kira kalau misalkan kita sebagai dari sudut pandang ekonomi gitu ya, kita mensupport deep decarbonization sekarang gitu ya, kira-kira akan bagaimana dari impact-nya terhadap ekonomi? Silakan Pak Faisal.
Bu Isa, kalau kita tidak melakukan dekarbonisasi, maka pada tahun 2040 defisit energi kita itu tak terperikan, 80 miliar US dollar. Ya. Defisit energi loh. Jadi kita itu lebih banyak mengimpor daripada mengekspor. Karena apa? Kebutuhan kita itu akan naik luar biasa karena kita konsumsi energi per kapitanya kan masih rendah. Indonesia dan India kan konsumsi per kapitanya masih rendah. Sementara India dan Indonesia itu kita lihat pertumbuhan ekonominya relatif tinggi dan pertumbuhan penduduknya juga masih positif kan. Sehingga India dan Indonesia ada di atas garis tren. Jadi kita bisa bayangkan kalau tidak terjadi dekarbonisasi, maka fuel energi yang digunakan tambahannya akan sangat besar dan barangkali kabut terus di seluruh Indonesia sepanjang hari. Tapi bukan kabut karena seperti di puncak, tapi kabut karena polusi. Oleh karena itulah long term-nya juga dari segi makroekonomi, dari energy policy, the only way untuk kita tidak terperangkap pada defisit energi yang merusak kedaulatan energi, kemandirian energi adalah dengan cara apa? Dekarbonisasi dan shift dari semakin lebih cepat ya, shifting lebih cepat karena kita sumber dayanya memadai. Kita punya matahari dalam 365 hari, kita punya kekuatan dari ombak, bisa dari angin dan macam-macam yang akan membuat aktivitas ekonomi semakin meningkat dan efisien, makin produktif. Dan harus diingat kalau kita tidak melakukan dekarbonisasi, maka ongkos energi kita akan semakin mahal. Kita kehilangan kesempatan untuk memperoleh energi yang semakin murah akibat kemajuan teknologi luar biasa dari pengembangan renewable energy. Jadi kita harus sadar sesadar-sadarnya bahwa kita ini bukan dipaksa oleh dunia internasional, bukan apa, tapi karena memang kesadaran bahwa inilah jalan terbaiknya. Dan kalau komitmennya sudah ada, maka jalan itu akan selalu ada gitu. Jalan itu selalu ada sebagaimana ditunjukkan oleh report World Economic Forum yang baru-baru ini ya. Dia bilang harus replace nih coal power dengan renewables. Karena kalau tidak, ya kita tidak bisa mencapai target 1,5 derajat Celcius itu. Ya, jadi coal retirement mechanism itu membantu negara-negara yang melakukannya dan instrumen-instrumen untuk mempercepat pace out ini juga sudah tersedia gitu. Oh kita miskin, enggak, bukan karena itu. It's a matter of kebijakan fiskalnya seperti apa. Pemerintah coba sampai sekarang itu masih akan mensubsidi fosil fuel ya di APBN itu ratusan triliun. Tapi berapa? Tidak sampai 100 triliun, cuman berapa triliun untuk renewable. Jadi kembali di sini dibutuhkan semacam the deal of the century oleh Indonesia gitu berkomitmen untuk the deal of the century loh ini ya, the deal dari semuanya untuk membawa Indonesia menuju ekonomi yang lebih kuat, lebih produktif, lebih efisien, lebih berdaya saing. Tapi kalau kita biarkan ini dengan kecepatan yang lambat, maka kita akan digilas oleh persaingan dunia ini.
Baik, Pak Faisal menanggapi, jadi kalau menurut Pak Faisal yang paling utama yang harus dilakukan sebagai mungkin kalau dilihat dari sisi kebijakan ekonomi gitu ya, apakah subsidi yang harus diubah dulu atau memang kita mengurangi impor? Kira-kira bagaimana menurut Pak Faisal agar Indonesia bisa mulai untuk melakukan dekarbonisasi? Dilihat dari sektor ekonominya dulu gitu, kebijakan ekonominya dulu. Kira-kira bagaimana Pak Faisal?
Nah, kalau kita ingin ikut India, ya, menurut saya pas gitu. Kita penduduk, walaupun India penduduk jauh lebih banyak ya. Tadi Dr. Ghosh juga mengatakan micro and small enterprises-nya 60 juta ya kalau tidak salah. Di Indonesia lebih banyak lagi tuh 80 juta, ya 98% unit usaha di Indonesia mikro. Nah, apa yang dimiliki oleh Indonesia yang Indonesia tidak punya, dimiliki India dan Indonesia tidak punya. Number of engineers di India itu luar biasa banyak, ya. Kalau kita di luar negeri tanya orang India yang sekolah di Amerika di mana-mana, jurusannya itu paling banyak kalau tidak engineering ya kedokteran gitu ya. Nah kalau kita apa macam-macam gitu, tidak fokus. Nah yang menyebabkan India waktu menerapkan renewable energy, dia manufacturingnya sudah siap. Nah kalau kita kan kalau menerapkan renewable energy, pabrik panelnya tidak ada, ya. Peneliti kita banyak sebetulnya, tapi di luar negeri semua, ya seperti yang di MIT itu sedang mengembangkan alternatif dari silikon yang jauh lebih murah. Namun peneliti di Indonesia tidak dihargai. Jadi harus ada komitmen kebangkitan Indonesia dengan mengedepankan riset. Masa cuma riset terhadap GDP cuma 0,3%, ya enggak bisa. Akhirnya kan kita tidak ingin kita pakai renewable energy, tapi seluruh peralatannya kita import. Ya, bukan seperti itu. Ini total football, ya. Kita mengembangkan renewable juga harus diiringi oleh penguatan industri yang mendukung renewable itu. Jangan jadi konsumen terus seperti sekarang.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Faisal. Dr. Ghosh, so I would like to hear your opinion from the point of view of Pak Faisal in terms of the SMEs in Indonesia and India and also human resources, because Pak Faisal mentioned in India there are so many Indian graduates in engineering and medical science. But in Indonesia, we actually have so many people, graduates from different sectors. We are not ready yet for the manufacturing industry in renewable energy, unlike India. So perhaps if you can give your insight, your opinion, and also perhaps another question in India, what do you think the economic policy should be prepared in terms of supporting decarbonization? So that's the two questions for you.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. I broadly agree with what Faisal has just said, but there is one thing I would like to correct, which is that even in India, at least, we do not have as large a solar panel manufacturing capacity as our deployment. So 80% of the panels, at least, we are importing currently. Of course, we have a much larger wind turbine manufacturing capacity. Now, this is, of course, a concern. On one hand, we have prioritized the deployment over the manufacturing. So we will buy panels wherever they are, as cheap as we can get. and drive down the cost of energy. Now that has allowed us to get to that more than 100,000 megawatts of renewables. And I believe that was the right approach to kickstart the renewable energy market. But now that we have a very large target of going from 100,000 to 450,000 megawatts, now there are what are called production linked incentives. PLI scheme has been introduced since last year to encourage the manufacturing of the panels, etc., at home as well. Now, that does not mean that the companies have to be only Indian. You could be a company from the US, from Germany, from China, etc., but you can take advantage of the scheme to be able to set up that manufacturing facility. One more thing I would argue is that eventually this energy transition requires for us to have more linked supply chains. Let me take an example of batteries. Batteries will be absolutely crucial as we keep building out more renewable energy. Now, Indonesia has the world's largest reserves of nickel and the largest mine production of nickel. Going back to that value extraction thesis that Faisal was talking about. Now, rather than extracting coal, if we were extracting nickel from Indonesia, it becomes a critical component of the lithium-ion batteries, right? So you become a part of that integrated supply chain of battery manufacturing. One more example let me give. I have recently published a report calling for a global hydrogen alliance. Now, hydrogen will be the sort of industrial fuel of the future, you know, to manufacture steel, to manufacture fertilizer, and so forth. Now, green hydrogen, which is basically using clean energy or renewable energy to split the water between into hydrogen and oxygen, can become a very important fuel. Now, to manufacture the green hydrogen, you need electrolyzers, which are currently very costly. So if I look across the world, I see the bulk of the research and development is happening in, say, Northern Europe or in Japan or maybe in the United States. The bulk of the demand for hydrogen or green hydrogen will come from Asia. Southeast Asia, China, and India, South Asia, right? So how do we build a bridge between where the R&D is happening and where the demand will come from, right? And if we can bring economies like ours, the emerging economies, together into a green hydrogen alliance, it allows us to become part or start becoming part of that supply chain. What I would not like is that the green economy of the future also continues the technology divides of the past. So can we build a green economy that also narrows the technology gap, right? So whether it is in building or manufacturing the solar panels of today, the batteries of tomorrow, or the green hydrogen of day after, I think there are ways in which our domestic policy and our international cooperation can begin to bind our economies closer together and deliver that value based on brain power that Faisal was referring to earlier.
All right. Well, talking about green hydrogen, and I think like in Indonesia, we still have to prepare our human resources, and I'm sure in other countries as well. And also, my question is actually, how do we prepare the employment? How,
Right.
because it should start from the government, preparing this ecosystem, new system, green hydrogen in Indonesia, for example. And for the public itself, they may not know that they actually can work in this field as one of green jobs opportunities. So please, Dr. Ghosh, if you can share something on that.
No, that's a very good question. So in India, one of the things that we are doing is called, they're called skills councils, and they have been set up for different sectors. So you don't have to be a top-notch engineer from MIT. You could be basically a graduate but you go through a skills council. Now, a specific dedicated skills council has been created for green jobs. It's called the Skills Council for Green Jobs. And under that, there are various programs to train tens of thousands of people, not as advanced engineers, but at least as that kind of bulk of the workforce. Because you're absolutely right that unless you have that manpower or woman power to be able to deploy these capacities in clean energy, it's not going to happen. The other area, which is a growth area, for instance, is cooling. Indonesia is a hot and humid country. India is a hot and humid country. So we brought out, India was the first country in the world that brought out a cooling action plan. And again, my organization, CEW, co-wrote that cooling action plan, where one of the components that we are primarily focusing on are R&D and training. So, if you think of air conditioners, cold chain, all of these things are critical to increase the productivity of your workforce, to preserve your agricultural output, to make your offices and your commercial establishments more friendly, etc. Now, this will itself, in India alone, this workforce already is 200,000 people. It will rise to maybe 500,000 people. So we are putting in place the training curriculum for the cooling technicians. Then comes, I was talking about green hydrogen. There alone, again, the supply chain would demand about 1.6 million people. So again, you need to start investing in that capacity. I simply want to say that that capacity does not exist right now. But if you start putting in those policies, and the Skills Council also work with the private sector, work with government agencies. So if you start putting in those policies now, then you will start to reap the benefits. You will have that manpower, woman power ready in 5 years, 10 years time when you're ready to take off. So today, say Indonesia has 9,000 megawatts of renewable energy. You have a potential of over 700,000 megawatts of renewable energy, right? So of course, it's not going to happen by 2030, but can we put in place the policies that bring together the public sector and the private sector and the training institutes to have such similar sort of skills councils, so that the workforce keeps developing as your policies for deployment. So the two run in parallel. At least that is what we are attempting to do here.
Oke, thank you Dr. Ghosh. Pak Faisal, bagaimana menurut Pak Faisal nih, tadi disinggung masalah research and development R&D, training, kurikulum. Kira-kira kalau di Indonesia sekarang seperti apa sih situasinya, dan kalau kita mau mendukung green employment ya, karena ngomongin dekarbonisasi, impactnya ke ekonomi, pasti kita harus menyiapkan future employment yang sangat mendukung dekarbonisasi gitu. Bagaimana Pak Faisal?
Lagi-lagi kita perlu melihat ini sebagai the deal of the century. Kita wariskan ke generasi Z, generasi milenial, kehidupan yang lebih baik buat Indonesia. Nah, kemudian elemen apa yang harus kita perkuat? Triple bottom line itu. Lantas pendidikannya merespon seperti apa? Industrinya, kebijakan industrialnya seperti apa? Intinya yang ingin saya sampaikan adalah konsep transformasi, ya, yang komprehensif. Jadi transformasi ekonomi, transformasi industri, transformasi tadi dari extractive value extraction ke value creation, kemudian juga tidak bisa berbasis semua dikerjakan oleh pusat. Ini daerah. Karena the beauty of renewable energy ini, setiap daerah punya sumber daya yang berbeda-beda kan. Ada matahari, ada angin, ada ombak, ada biomas, ada macam-macam. Jadi kita tidak bisa mengedepankan kurikulum satu buat seluruh Indonesia. Nah, harus diperkuat daerahnya. Nah, yang terakhir, ingin saya tekankan adalah tadi Dr. Ghosh mengatakan nggak perlu teknisi tamatan MIT gitu ya. Nah, jadi vocational school yang betul-betul dedicated untuk renewable energy. Tidak semata-mata aspek teknis ya sebetulnya, tapi juga dimensi-dimensi yang lain. Jadi mengikuti. Kemudian itu semua tercermin di budget. Kalau dari intervensi langsung pemerintah tercermin semuanya di budget. Nah, lantas tidak bisa seluruhnya dilakukan oleh pemerintah, maka insentif harus diberikan kepada swasta ya untuk mempercepat nih ya, kepada swasta yang mengembangkan requirement seperti itu, karena swasta kan nggak bisa nunggu bagaimana nih sumber daya manusianya belum siap, industrinya ada, nanti alasannya nanti udah lagi impor tenaga kerja dari luar, sensitif lagi. Jadi betul-betul konsep transformasi. Saya dengar sih Bappenas sedang menyusun ya. Jadi transformasi ekonomi pasca COVID dengan kesadaran itu tadi, bahwa kita tidak bisa lagi menggunakan cara-cara lama untuk menghindarkan Indonesia dari middle income trap. Ya, kalau kita ini renewable energy ini semacam apa ya, penyelamat kita sehingga kita bisa terhindar dari middle income trap. Sehingga kita bisa naik kelas lah ya, dari negara berpendapatan menengah menjadi berpendapatan tinggi untuk negara maju. Itu saya rasa.
Baik Pak Faisal, mungkin karena waktu kita sangat pendek, kurang lebih 4 menit lagi, sedikit mungkin Pak Faisal dan Dr. Ghosh untuk menambahkan kalau dilihat dari kerjasama internasional, bagaimana melihat proyeksi ke depannya agar kita sama-sama untuk mensupport dekarbonisasi secara mendalam melalui kerjasama ekonomi yang lebih baik gitu. Mungkin dimulai dari Pak Faisal lalu Dr. Ghosh, sekitar 1 menit mungkin.
Ya ini kan common goods ya, yang namanya climate change, green economy is common goods. Jadi tidak mungkin satu negara melaksanakan dan yang lain tidak. Jadi misalnya Malaysia maju gitu, Indonesia tidak, ya nggak ada gunanya Malaysia itu maju. Karena apa? Ini eksternalitas negatifnya kan kita sudah ngalami, mengekspor asap gitu-gitu ya. Jadi memang harus ada semacam kaidah baru gitu di dalam pergaulan internasional ini untuk di-share common goods ini. Ada ya semacam apa ya, soft regulation gitu, soft regulatory framework, semacam kesepakatan terhadap SDGs, dan ini sebetulnya bagian dari SDGs juga ya. Kalau untuk mengatasi ini semua kan tidak ada gunanya, misalnya seperti vaksin juga. Negara maju vaksinasinya di atas 50%, tapi negara-negara miskin hanya 2% gitu. Ya tidak bisa juga. Ya, akan mengalami kendala gitu. Oleh karena itu saya mendukung upaya-upaya untuk melakukan kerjasama yang semakin erat sehingga ya setiap negara lebih cepat mampu mewujudkan komitmen dunia itu, climate change itu, perubahan iklim.
Oke, baik. Dr. Ghosh, please if you can share a little bit about the international cooperation in terms of decarbonization.
Indeed. I'm going to just pick up on what Faisal has been saying. He's been saying that for India, for Indonesia, there has to be this deal of the century. I have written elsewhere that we need, at the global level, we need a deal for development. And we have to think about the climate negotiations and the and the other global discussions. For instance, this week at the UN, there is the high-level dialogue on energy that is underway for the first time in 40 years. Now, if we only think of climate change as an issue of the carbon equation, if we only think of energy as something that the energy ministries will deal with, then we don't get to that kind of deal for development. We have to think of this as what is the future of our economy? What is the, as I stated right at the outset, where will new investment come in? Where will new jobs get created? And will that be sustainable for the planet? So at an international level, I believe a few things can be done. One of them I've already touched upon, the Global Green Hydrogen Alliance. It will allow for countries that missed the clean technology bus of the past to be able to deliver and develop and co-own the intellectual property of the next generation of clean technologies. Second, we need to, I call it powering livelihoods globally. We need to use clean energy to drive livelihood activities, productive use activities, especially amongst vulnerable communities, whether it's in rural areas or urban slums, etc. And for that, you need a platform that brings together philanthropic capital, patient capital, venture capital, and commercial capital to be able to tap into those billions of dollars of opportunity for those poor, vulnerable communities. The third thing that has to happen is we need to de-risk the investments in countries like ours. Once we set out the policies, we now need to attract the international investors. And they don't invest because they think investing in India or Indonesia or Philippines is risky. Now we need a platform, international platform, to be able to pool the risks across projects across our countries and lower the risk curve. Just like the pandemic, flatten the curve, the risk curve, to be able to lower the cost of finance and attract more investment. And finally, we need a global platform to build resilience. If we tap into the IMF's special drawing rights and create a $10 or $20 billion global resilience reserve fund, then when our countries get severely impacted by a climate shock, it could be a cyclone, it could be a drought, it could be a coastal flood, etc., that reserve fund, resilience reserve fund, can pay out. So let's build international cooperation on new technologies, on powering livelihoods for the vulnerable communities, on lowering the risks and lowering the cost of capital for clean energy investments, and building a resilience or an insurance cushion against climate shocks. These can be new ways in which we can get a new deal for development.
Alright, thanks a lot Dr. Ghosh. Terima kasih banyak kepada kedua narasumber saya saat ini, Pak Faisal juga dan Dr. Ghosh. Semoga apa yang kita diskusikan bisa bermanfaat untuk kita semua. Karena waktu juga sudah lebih dari jam 12, mungkin saya tutup diskusi kita siang ini dengan juga mengucapkan terima kasih kepada para peserta, Bapak dan Ibu yang telah menyimak rangkaian diskusi di acara Indonesia Energy Transition Dialogue 2021. Sesi ini sesi terakhir, siang nanti kita akan ada pengumuman pemenang dari lomba yang dilakukan sebagai acara sebelum pelaksanaan IETD. Akhir kata saya mengucapkan terima kasih, mohon maaf jika ada kesalahan dan sampai jumpa di lain kesempatan.
Hadirin sekalian, demikian tadi telah kita ikuti bersama dialog singkat mengenai dampak dekarbonisasi dari sektor ekonomi. Tentunya ini menjadi topik menarik untuk kita diskusikan bersama, terlebih dalam momen saat ini di hari kelima dari IETD 2021. Sekali lagi kami mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Ibu Lisa Wijayani dan juga seluruh narasumber yang telah bergabung dalam sesi diskusi kali ini. Hadirin yang kami hormati, kita akan melanjutkan ke sesi berikutnya. Kita akan jeda sejenak untuk beristirahat sebelum nantinya kita akan kembali di afternoon sessions hari ini. Selamat beristirahat, kita akan kembali berjumpa pada pukul 14 waktu Indonesia Barat atau jam 2 siang. Sampai jumpa.